You don't exist. Take a perk and a talk of that shit. Money swallowed like sis. Dead up perfect in the kid. Got a billion who take on my hate. Look me better put on the road I just spent. I know we got $1 million. The devil that shit ain't not cheaper than
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to MangaMuse. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the 7th part of What If Deku Learns Under the Batman. Smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. David struggled in vain as he was dragged across the cold cement floor. He was taken by the Red Hood to an old warehouse, bound at his hands and feet. "What do you want from me?" he said. "Do you work for the Joker? I can get him the device, just please take me back to my daughter." "I don't think that'll work, Davy boy," said a voice next to him. Looking up, David let out a startled scream. On the other side of the room lay the Joker, his arms and legs bound tightly. Blood was seeping from multiple gashes on the sides of his face, his jaw sticking out at an awkward angle. He looked as if his face had been run over, but it didn't seem to even bother him. "Hello, Davy," said the Joker, his insane eyes brightening. "Looks like you were roped into this too, eh? I don't understand. What's going on?" said David, turning back to the Red Hood, who ignored his questions as he continued to drag him. With a mighty heave, he lifted David and threw him hard down onto a large desk, knocking the wind out of him. The Red Hood then lifted David's head, showing him the news reporting on the Titan monsters that were destroying the city. "You caused this, Shield," said the Red Hood. "All the buildings destroyed, all the lives lost. It's all your fault." David was abruptly thrown to the floor, hitting his head on the concrete. He could feel blood seeping from an open gash on his forehead. "I didn't mean for this to happen," said David, tears mixed with blood streaming down his face. "I only wanted to save All Might." "Oh, Davy Pooh, you should know now that good intentions kill more people than I do," said the Joker. The Red Hood kicked him hard in the face, knocking him over onto his back. He kneeled onto the Joker's neck, drawing a gun and placing it against his head. "I'd choose your last words very carefully, clown," he said dangerously. "Party pooper," said the Joker, choking. The Red Hood stood and walked to the other side of the room. He began shuffling through a pile of old tools from a utility closet. "If you are going to kill me, so be it. But I have to know," said David. "Is what Alfred said true? Are you really him?" "Ooh, a mystery," said the Joker. "I hate mysteries. Who is this mysterious Red Hood? Tell me, who is it?" "Someone you helped create," said the Red Hood without turning. "That sounds cryptic," said the Joker, "but interesting. Tell me more." "We're going to have a little fun first," said the Red Hood, turning back to him. He was carrying a large, heavy crowbar. The Joker swallowed hard. "I think he's talking to you, Davy." David watched in horror as the Red Hood beat the Joker with the crowbar. Try as he might, he could not block out his maniacal laughter that came with each sickening and crushing blow. Izuku stared at the holographic projection of Gotham City before him, placed on the conference table in the Batcave war room. Surrounding the table with him was Batman, All Might, Nightwing, Barbara, Alfred, and Melissa. Several parts of the blue projection of the city was lit up with red. "These are where the Titan monsters are currently attacking the city," said Batman, pointing to the lights. "I have rallied several hero agencies around Gotham, and they are working on subduing the creatures. Thanks to David, we have a working anti-serum, and Lucius is attempting to mass-produce samples now, but it will take time. We still don't know where the Joker is or where Jason took David," said All Might. "We're working on that," said Barbara. "I've been working with an algorithm that could potentially track their location, but I'll need more data." "That's where you two come in," said Batman, gesturing to Nightwing and Izuku. "I've marked several points of contact in the Batcomputer's GPS where the Red Hood has shown the most activity. Nightwing, you're going to take the locations in Myagani Island. Deku will take Founders Island." "What are you going to do?" said Nightwing. "I'm going to find the Joker, starting with locations on Bleak Island," said Batman, pointing to the hologram. "We don't know how much of the Titan formula he has, and we need to put a stop to him making any more monsters. We can't rule out the possibility that Jason may have caught up with him as well. If during your search you find any of them, send an alert over the radio, and we'll rendezvous." "He's my father," said Melissa. "I want to help." "It's too dangerous," said All Might immediately. "I agree," said Batman. "You need to stay here." "Look, I'm not a combatant," said Melissa, "but I'm smart, and no one knows my father or his inventions better than me. I can stay and help Barbara. I can monitor Izuku over the Batcomputer and act as his eyes and ears." Batman considered her for a minute. "Get her set up at a terminal," he said to Barbara. "This way, kiddo," said Barbara, wheeling away as Melissa followed. "This is it," said Batman. You have your missions. Let's go. Izuku dropped out of the Batwing as it passed over Founder's Island, landing deftly on one of the rooftops below. The city was in chaos around them, and several pro-heroes from the various agencies across the city were engaged in the attacks against the monsters as others evacuated the city. Izuku began his investigation across several of the buildings where the Red Hood was known to be spotted, but he was having difficulty coming across any kind of a trail to follow. Many of the buildings were heavily damaged or destroyed from the monster attacks. Others seemed to yield no kind of relevant data for Barbara's algorithm. "I've got nothing here," said Izuku over the comm. "How about you, Nightwing?" "Zilch," replied Nightwing. "Keep looking," said Barbara. "There's bound to be something." "The buildings are too damaged," said Izuku. "It's hard to get a reading on." Izuku's voice trailed off over the comm. "Deku, what's wrong?" said Melissa. "Did you find something?" "I'm not sure," replied Deku. Down on the streets below his current location, he noticed there was an overturned armored van. He didn't know what it was, but something about this van stuck out to him as odd. He used the detective vision in his cowl to give him a closer look. The van had several inhabitants. Most of them were dead, except one, who appeared to be struggling to get out of the passenger side window. Izuku grappled down to the van's location. This man was amazingly still alive, but he was most likely injured and had to get him to a hospital. "Are you all right?" said Izuku, approaching the car. "My name is Deku. You're going to be." Izuku froze as his eyes locked with the man inside the car. He was wearing a damaged clown mask, as were his fallen comrades around him. It was one of the Joker's henchmen. "Phew," shouted the man, reaching for a gun. Izuku kicked the man hard in the face, pulling him out of the wreckage and cuffing his hands behind his back. "Let me go, you freak," shouted the henchman. Izuku noticed he had several contusions and lesions across his body, one of them a large gash on his back seeping with blood under his torn shirt. He also had several broken bones in his legs and arms. Izuku knelt down hard on the large gash, causing the man to cry out in pain. "Where's the Joker?" said Izuku, his voice modulated to a deep baritone. "I don't know what you're talking about," said the man. Izuku pulled up his gauntlet computer. "I would seriously reconsider your answer," Izuku said. "All I have to do is send this signal, and I'll have Batman down here in 10 minutes, tops." "You wouldn't dare," said the man, horrified. "In a heartbeat," said Izuku. "And after what your boss did to him tonight, I don't think he's going to be very happy to see you." "I don't know where he is," said the man. "Some crazy guy on a bike shot the van to hell and took off with him." "Did you see him?" said Izuku. "What did he look like?" "Some crazy bastard in a red helmet," said the man. "What direction did they go?" "They went that way," said the man, nodding ahead of them. Izuku looked in the direction to see an access tunnel for the bridge leading to Bleak Island. Izuku dragged the man to safety, sending an anonymous tip to Gotham Police to have an ambulance pick up the criminal before grappling away. "Guys, I have a lead," said Izuku. "The Red Hood has the Joker, and he took off towards Bleak Island." "That's great, Deku," said Barbara. "I'll plug it into my algorithm with the other data collected and see." "Don't bother," came Batman's voice over the comm. "I've found them." Batman stepped into the dark warehouse. His detective mode registered 3 life signs, one of them faint. As he approached the center of the warehouse, a light above them abruptly turned on, shining on 2 of the 3 life signs that he detected tied to 2 chairs, the Joker and David. "Batman," said David, "finally decided to join the party, eh, Batsy?" said the Joker, laughing weakly and coughing up blood. "You'll have to take my next turn for pin the tail on the Robin. I think my lung has collapsed." As Batman made his way over to untie the hostages, a large video projection appeared suddenly on the wall before them. Batman froze. The man in the video was tied to an old wheelchair. Though he had a black bag over his head, he recognized the red and gold suit he wore. "Jason," Batman thought, horrified. The Joker slowly walked into the frame of the video recording, his mouth twisting into a perverse smile as he looked over his captive. The man perked up at the sounds of his footsteps, trying to fight against the restraints. "Batman," said Jason. "Is that you?" "Batman's not coming to save you, Jason," said the Joker, taking off the black hood. "He'll come," said Jason defiantly. "It's been 6 months now, Jason," said the Joker, placing his hand on Jason's shoulders. "I think it's time to face the facts." "Screw you," said Jason. "That's the spirit," said the Joker. "You're a chip off the old bad block." "Not that it will do you much good," the Joker added somberly. "Why don't you just kill me?" said Jason. "What? Oh, no, 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 no," said the Joker. "I'm not going to kill you." "Well, not yet anyway. You're my sidekick now. Imagine it, you and me out on the street, starting fights, picking on the weak. A regular dynamic duo. Just like Bats and the next kid he picks up." "He wouldn't," said Jason. You think, said Joker. Strange, seems to me that Batsy is always in the market for a new sidekick. And besides, don't you think it's strange that the world's greatest detective, the man you've seen solve hundreds of unsolvable cases, can't seem to find one lost puppy like yourself? You're wrong, said Jason. Oh, I'm sorry, Jason, said the Joker mockingly. I don't want to have to be the one to tell you all this, but I think it's the only way for you to get closure, for you to really move on. The Joker picked up a crowbar off the table next to him, hitting Jason hard in the chest, causing the wheelchair to roll out of the camera shot. I know it hurts, he added. But sometimes, you have to be cruel to be kind. As the video ended, another one appeared on the screen. Jason hanging by his hands from a rope tied to the ceiling, bound and gagged. He struggled in fear as the Joker circled him like a hungry vulture, carrying a branding iron with the letter J glowing red hot on the end. Wakey, wakey, said Joker in his sing-songy voice. What? Do you think I'm going to hurt you? Why? I'm not the bad one here. No, 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 no. It's Batman. He's abandoned you, thrown you away like an unwanted puppy. Can I keep him, Daddy? I promise I'll take good care of him, the Joker said, his voice high-pitched, crouching for dramatic effect. Anything to make you happy, princess, he said, standing upwards and speaking in a deep voice. Just make sure people know he's yours. The Joker pressed a button, causing the latch on the rope keeping Jason suspended to release, causing him to fall to the floor in a heap. The Joker quickly stood over Jason as he tried to crawl away, and begged for mercy, screaming as the Joker placed the hot brand to his cheek. I want to keep him forever, said the Joker, laughing maniacally as the video stopped. Oh, such memories, said the Joker that was tied to the chair. You sick bastard, said David. All the color had drained from his face. Hey, I don't knock on your home movies, said the Joker indignantly. 1 year, said a voice from the darkness around them. That's how long this monster kept me. Jason stepped forward out of the darkness, pointing his pistol straight at Batman. He tortured me, said Jason. Hurt me, took me to the brink of death only to bring me back again to hurt me some more. For a whole year, Jason, Batman began, but was cut off. You could have saved me, said Jason. You could have stopped it all. But that's not even the worst thing. The worst thing is that, even after all of that, you still won't kill this bastard. He pointed his gun to the Joker's head, who simply laughed. Jason, don't, said Batman warningly. Why? Shouted Jason. Why won't you take a life? Why won't you take his life? Are you too weak? Is it too hard? No, said Batman. Because it'd be too easy. There hasn't been a second that has passed that I don't think about it. Think about subjecting him to every single thing he's ever done, every pain he's ever inflicted. And then, finally, ending him. You do care, said the Joker. So why don't you? Said Jason, ignoring him. Because once I go down that path, I know I can never come back, said Batman. This isn't about killing just anyone, Batman, said Jason. This is about killing the man who took me away from you. And you can't even do that. So I'm taking it out of your hands. He pulled out another gun from its holster, putting it to David's head. No, please, said David. Stop this, Jason, said Batman. It has to be this way, shouted Jason. One way or another, he's going to die tonight, and you're going to be the one who does it. Either you save S.H.I.E.L.D. and let this monster die, or he dies. This is turning out better than I hoped, said the Joker. S.H.I.E.L.D. is innocent, said Batman. You think creating those monsters out there makes him innocent, said Jason. He was fooled, just like I was, said Batman. I should have known that you were alive. I should have found more clues. I should have found you. I should have checked the mannequin harder, made sure that it was you. But I didn't. I was grieving, Jason, and I was stupid. Stupid and careless. This is my fault. I'm sorry, Jason. It's too late for that, Batman, said Jason. It's him or S.H.I.E.L.D. Decide. He pulled back the hammer on the pistol against David's head. 3, 2. The window above them erupted as Izuku burst through it with incredible speed, glass shards raining glass down upon them. He flew towards Jason, using his quirk to boost his speed, ramming hard into him and propelling them through the warehouse wall and into the window of the building next to them. Batman seized his chance to free David, but left the Joker tied to the chair. Oh dear, said the Joker in mock concern. I just hate it when the kids fight. Are you all right, David? Said Batman. I'm fine, said David. Where is Melissa? She's safe, said Batman, calling the Batmobile from his gauntlet computer. We have to get you out of here. Batman was interrupted by an immense crash on the other side of the warehouse. The wall was reduced to rubble as one of the Titan monsters smashed through it, taking one brief look at the three men before it roared with savage fury and charged them. These Girl Scouts are getting pushy, said the Joker, erupting in laughter. Batman immediately threw David out of the way of the charging Titan monster and began throwing a barrage of explosive. Knew he had to be careful. The poor civilian that was this monster was out of control, and he had to put it down carefully without killing it until Lucius could have the anti-serum ready. And every second he was fighting this creature, Midoriya was left to face the Red Hood. Disciple against disciple. Izuku and Jason crashed hard onto the floor of the empty building next to the warehouse. It seemed to be some sort of storage facility, piled high with shipping crates. The two of them grappled before Jason kicked Izuku hard, knocking him away. Izuku sprang backwards on his hands to his feet, throwing 3 batarangs towards him, Jason shooting them out of the air with pinpoint accuracy. Izuku charged his would-be brother in arms, both of them locking hands again as they grappled. "This isn't right, Jason," said Izuku. "You need to stop before it's too late." "Don't get in my way, kid," shouted Jason. He recentered his weight, throwing Izuku off balance and sending him crashing into a stack of crates behind them. Izuku rallied, throwing a barrage of punches and kicks at the Red Hood, who blocked and dodged his blows effortlessly. He drew his pistols on Izuku and opened fire, who had just enough time to duck behind more warehouse crates. "Don't do this to yourself, Jason," said Izuku. "You're better than this. Don't pretend you know me," shouted Jason. "I know you better than you think," said Izuku. "You're just a replacement," said Jason. "He'll do it to you too. You don't matter to him any more than I did." Izuku lunged from behind the crates and threw a swift kick at Jason's head, who ducked a split second before it connected. Izuku used the momentum from his kick to spin in midair, launching an explosive blast against Jason, sending him flying backwards. "I lost someone I cared about to a villain," said Izuku. "Not a day went by that I didn't think about destroying him. And when I finally got the chance to do it, I let him live." "Then you're as much of a fool as Bruce," said Jason, firing his pistols again. Izuku lunged out of the way, but not before 2 bullets struck him in the arm and leg. He yelled in pain as he rolled behind the cover of the large crates, using the medical sealant in his utility belt to seal off the blood flow. "You think this is going to accomplish something?" said Izuku. "You think killing the Joker will change anything?" "Shut up," shouted Jason, throwing a grenade towards the crates he was hiding behind. Izuku reacted quickly, kicking the grenade out the window of the building before it exploded. "If you kill him, someone will only take his place," said Izuku, throwing more batarangs. "Someone like you." "I'm nothing like him," shouted Jason, ramming hard into Izuku, grappling him to the ground before raining blows down upon him. Izuku took several blows before using his quirk to blast Jason off him, sending him careening into a stack of crates. Izuku bounded up and leaped into the air above him. "AP shot," shouted Izuku. Several small blasts in rapid succession emanated from his hands, all of them connecting with the Red Hood, sending him backwards into the wall behind him. Jason struggled to get to his feet as Izuku approached him. "I know what it's like to be kidnapped," said Izuku, "to be tortured at the hands of a villain. I know the anger you feel." "You don't know," said Jason weakly. "You can't know. You're just a replacement. Don't pretend you." "Bruce didn't train me to replace you," said Izuku. "My hero journey has always been my own. He just gave me the start I needed." "Please, Jason. It doesn't have to be this way." Izuku reached his hand. "Please come home. We can help you." Jason paused, saying nothing. The mask he wore was cracked and broken from their battle. Slowly, he raised his hands and took it off his head, revealing the man Izuku had seen from the video back at the warehouse. His face lined with scars, a brand mark in the shape of a J across his cheek. "It's too late, kid," said Jason. "Too late for that." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a remote detonator, pressing the red button before Izuku could react. Izuku used his cowl vision to look at the warehouse that still housed Batman, David and the Joker. Izuku could see that Jason had lined the warehouse with explosives. Izuku turned back to Jason, whose face remained passive. "You've got 10 seconds, kid," said Jason. "Better make them count." Izuku didn't hesitate, using his quirk to propel himself back to the warehouse. Nightwing made his way to Bleak Island in the Batwing. He was almost to the warehouse that Batman had marked as the target. The Batwing had taken too long for it to reach him in Myagani Island, and he tried as fast as he could to reach Bruce and Izuku on Bleak Island. He hoped that he could get there in time to help them with Jason. He still couldn't believe that Jason was alive. They were never very close. Jason was always a hothead, and Dick had moved on from being Batman's sidekick before Jason joined the team. But when he heard he had died, he was reminded of a devastation that he had not felt since his own parents' passing. He was closing in on the warehouse. He could already read 4 life signs from the scanners. He had to find a good spot to land before he could. The warehouse erupted in a massive explosion, knocking the Batwing aloft. Nightwing desperately tried to stabilize it, watching in horror as the warehouse burned below him. "Nightwing, what the hell happened?" said Barbara over the comm. What was that explosion? The warehouse just went up in flames, said Nightwing. What? Said Barbara. Where's my father? Said Melissa. Where's Izuku? What happened to them? I don't know, said Nightwing. I can't get a reading. After leveling out, he dropped from the Batwing onto one of the nearby rooftops below. He was using his cowl vision to try and find body signatures, but the fire made it difficult to register, and the flames were too wild for him to get in closer. Barbara, he said, bring the Batwing around and drop the flame retardant. Barbara complied, using the Batwing's autopilot to pass over the warehouse, dropping a blanket of white flame-resistant powder over the flames. The fire began to fade, but Nightwing was still having a hard time reading any body signatures. Batman, Deku, do you read? He spoke into the comm. He could only hear static. Do you copy? Please respond. Static. Deku. Batman, said Nightwing, beginning to panic. Please respond. Static. Deku. Batman, please res. We're all right, Nightwing. A wave of relief swept over Nightwing at the sound of Izuku's voice. Kid, don't you ever scare me like that again, he said. What's your location? Is Batman with you? I'm here, Nightwing, came Batman's voice over the comm. Deku used his quirk to blast a hole in the ground for us to take cover in. We're safe, but we're buried. Is David with you? The Joker, said Nightwing. Both unconscious, said Batman. You need to get us out of here, fast. I'll have emergency services here in half a second, said Nightwing. Just don't die on me down there. Izuku breathed deeply into the oxygen mask as Alfred looked over him back at the Batcave. He had sustained moderate injuries, specifically when Jason had shot him, but Alfred was able to remove the bullets and heal his injuries. All Might, Bruce, Nightwing and Melissa all stood around him as he sat on the examining table. How do you feel? Said All Might. Fine, replied Izuku. My mother is going to kill me. Hugh, it's my head that's on the chopping block this time, said Bruce. Perhaps it would be better if we kept Master Midoriya's involvement in this adventure our little secret for the time being, said Alfred. Izuku hated the idea of lying to his mother, but he wasn't in any hurry to tell her that his relaxing trip to America turned into another fight for his life. Bruce and Dick had hurried him away back to the Batcave so as to prevent anyone from finding out his identity. He was still an unlicensed hero student, and getting caught using his quirk would land him in a lot of hot water. What happened to Jason? Said All Might. Bruce shook his head. He was gone by the time we were dug out of the rubble, he said. His trail has gone cold, for now. Are you all right? Said All Might. Bruce didn't answer. They all turned as they heard someone clear their throat behind them. David had regained consciousness and had accompanied them. I just heard the news, said David. Lucius was able to get the antiserum to the hero agencies. Did it work? It did, Bruce confirmed. The Titan monsters are reverting back to their human selves. And the Joker, back in Arkham. Good, said David, sitting in a chair, sighing. What a mess I've made. I guess it's true what they say. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. What'll happen now? Asked Izuku. Now I am going to make a full confession to the police, said David, and tender my resignation with Island. I'll be lucky if I avoid jail time. I'm sorry, said Izuku. That's the price I pay, said David. I'm at peace with it. I'll speak with the DA, said Bruce. Perhaps I can get your sentence commuted. To what? Said David. Work release, said Bruce. For Wayne Tech Research and Development. Are you serious? Said David incredulously. The Titan formula is still out there somewhere, said Bruce. We need your brain to help combat it. Bruce, I don't know what to say, said David. I do, said Melissa, surprising Bruce with an abrupt hug. Thank you, Uncle Bruce. Don't mention it, said Bruce, patting her back awkwardly. Izuku sighed as he laid back on his bed back in his home in Japan, having just finished unpacking. His mother was overjoyed to see him, and had fussed a great deal over him from the minute he walked through the door. Bruce, Alfred and All Might had accompanied him back and had stayed for dinner, telling her every detail of his time in America. It was all fabricated, of course, mostly just of Izuku enjoying fun activities during his recuperation. Luckily, news of the monster attack on Gotham hadn't gotten as far as Japan. Gotham police squashed any report of Titan formula with local media, wanting to prevent any villains from getting their hands on it. Izuku would eventually tell his mother the truth, but when she was in a better state of mind to receive it. Saying goodbye to Melissa was the hardest part. He knew it wasn't going to be a permanent goodbye, as she and her father were moving to Gotham to work for Bruce. But even in the short time they had been together, he had grown quite attached to her. Before boarding the plane, she surprised him by giving him a big hug and planting a kiss on his cheek. See you around, Izuku, she had said to him. Definitely, said Izuku. As he began to drift off to sleep, he felt his phone vibrate in his pocket. It was a text from Uraraka. Hey, I heard you're back home, the message read. How was your trip to America? Don't spare any details. Izuku pondered for a moment before typing back, pretty uneventful. All Might sipped gingerly from his tea, stretching back in his chair. He was sitting at a large conference table at the Camino police station, one of the few places in Camino that managed to escape destruction during his battle with All for One. 3 others were sitting at the table with him: Detective Tsukachi, his old teacher, Gran Torino, and the Dark Knight himself, Batman. This meeting is long overdue, said Tsukachi. As you know, this is all top secret. What is discussed here doesn't leave this room. I understand, said Gran Torino. Agreed, said All Might. Batman merely nodded. I wanted to speak with you sooner, All Might, said Tsukachi. But I didn't expect your impromptu trip to America. Neither did I, said All Might, shooting Batman a sideways glance. Let's address the elephant in the room, said Batman. Tamura Shigaraki, said Gran Torino. Right, said Tsukachi. All for One has given us no indication that he knows where Shigaraki is hiding. If he does know, there is no prying it out of him. However, I have interviewed him myself, and as you know, my quirk is lie detection. From what I gather from our interrogation, he is telling the truth. Or a very good liar, said Gran Torino. I believe him, said Batman. He is purposefully keeping himself in the dark, so as to prevent the slightest chance of anyone finding out where Shigaraki is. So, we don't have any leads on where they could be hiding, said All Might. Shigaraki is never one to do things quietly for very long, said Tsukachi. We expect him to tip his hand sometime soon. And when that happens, we'll be ready. I may not be of much help, said All Might. My body no longer supports my quirk, not even for a little bit. But I won't just sit here. You plan on going after Shigaraki yourself, said Gran Torino. In your condition, that would be suicide, Toshinori. You heard it for yourself, said All Might. If Shigaraki is Nana Shimura's grandson, then we owe it to her to do what we can to save him. The only proof of that is what All for One said, said Tsukachi. Hardly a reliable source. Actually, said Gran Torino awkwardly, looking at Batman. Gran Torino and I have known this for some time, said Batman matter-of-factly. You what? Said All Might, standing in shock. Simmer down, Toshinori, said Gran Torino. Simmer down, said All Might. You both knew about this, and you didn't tell me. We had our reasons, said Batman. I agree with All Might, said Tsukachi. This is vital information that should have been brought forward. It could have helped us in. No, it wouldn't have, said Batman. All it did was confirm my worst fear about the boy, the grandson of All Might's master, being groomed to be his greatest enemy. The reason we kept it secret was to protect All Might. Protect me, said All Might. How could this possibly have protected me? If I had known, I could have. You could have what, Toshinori? Batman shot back, given him a nice pat on the head, followed by an I am here, and everything will be fine speech. You're not seeing him as a villain anymore, Toshinori. If you had known, you would have let your guard down, and he would have killed you without a second thought. You don't know. Yes, I do, said Batman. All for One has brainwashed the boy, filling him with lies all his life for a single purpose, to eliminate you and carry on his legacy. Do you think he knows about who his grandmother is? Do you think he cares? Not in the slightest. The only thing that matters to him is your death, and he will stop at nothing to achieve it. He's right, Toshinori, said Gran Torino. This kind of thinking is dangerous. No matter his lineage, he is still a criminal. I don't understand, said Tsukachi. Didn't you keep in contact with Shimura's family, even though you were so close to her? No, said Gran Torino. After her husband died, Shimura put her child in foster care to shield him from the hero world. She told Toshinori and me that she didn't want any contact to be made with him, even if something were to happen to her. Then how did you find out his lineage? Said Tsukachi. We couldn't find anyone in the national database with a disintegration quirk. Quirk registration is usually done by the parents after the quirk has manifested, said Batman. This is usually at a young age. My assumption is that Shigaraki's parents were killed sometime before or shortly after his quirk manifested. As for how I found him, I managed to recover a blood sample from when he was wounded at the USJ incursion. Searching the criminal database yielded no results, so I expanded my search parameters to include hospital records across the country over the course of 20 years. That's an extreme invasion of privacy, said Tsukachi. We're at war, said Batman simply. After an extensive search, I finally yielded a result, a partial match to one Kotaro Shimura, Nana Shimura's son, and Shigaraki's father. So there really is no mistaking it, said Gran Torino. Genetic confirmation of All for One's words. You still should have told me, said All Might. It was hard to keep the truth from you, Toshinori, said Gran Torino. But I agree with Batman. Knowing this information would have clouded your judgment and gotten you killed. All Might sat down, saying nothing. He was at war with himself. All this time, the grandson of his beloved master was alive and being groomed by their ultimate enemy right under their noses. If he had known, he could have saved the boy a lifetime of pain and torment. Master, I failed you again, he thought bitterly. At this time, Shigaraki's lineage is irrelevant, said Batman, stirring All Might out of his thoughts. He is no longer Shimura's grandson. He is Tamura Shigaraki, now the leader of the League of Villains, and must be brought to justice. Agreed, said Gran Torino. Where do we start? Said All Might. You're sitting this one out for now, Toshinori, said Gran Torino. You need to work through what you're feeling about Shigaraki, and you're in no state to face him should we find him. You need to focus on your role as a teacher at UA, where you'll be safest. I don't like just sitting back and doing nothing, said All Might. Detective Tsukachi, Gran Torino, and I will continue our investigation of the League of Villains, said Batman. You will be kept in the loop, but you will not engage them in any way. I understand, said All Might. Even though you can't be the symbol of peace you once were, said Gran Torino. Don't forget that All Might is still alive. Izuku had little time to rest before the start of the next semester. He had just barely finished unpacking from his trip to Gotham before he started packing again. This time to move into his new life and new home in the campus dormitories. Heights Alliance, the new dormitories, were constructed on the edge of UA campus, personally designed and overseen by Bruce himself. They were outfitted with the latest in security technology on the market. Having the students live in dorms on campus allowed for UA staff and security to keep a closer watch on them, as well as greatly reducing the risk of a targeted attack on the students while in transit. As he approached the front steps of the dormitories, Izuku was greeted warmly by the rest of his WANA classmates. Deku, said Uraraka, embracing Izuku in their usual hug. Midoriya, said Kirishima. It's good to see you back. Hello, Kirishima, said Izuku, Uraraka. It's great to see you both, too. Glad we all got the go-ahead to move in, said Sato. It took a lot of convincing from my parents, said Hagakure. We're glad to see the teachers got to come back, too, said Asui. The people at the press conference seemed to be pretty upset with them. I was afraid they wouldn't come back. I was surprised too. The students looked up to see Aizawa walking towards them, having just come from the dormitory entrance. I expect it was simply easier to bring the staff back instead of revamping the entire staff, he said, scratching his nose thoughtfully. Given everything that has happened, I am glad that we were able to bring Class 1 back together. I'll explain how your dorm assignments will work shortly. Before that, he added seriously, we haven't forgotten about the provisional hero licenses you were supposed to get during the training camp. The class began to chatter among themselves at this. So much had happened they had forgotten that the whole purpose of the training camp was to prepare them for their provisional licensing exam. This is important, so listen well, said Aizawa, silencing them. Kirishima, Yaoyorozu, Todoroki, Uraraka, Ida. Aizawa was pointing at them as he listed off their names. You five are the ones who broke the rules and went to rescue Midoriya that night. Though Aizawa was speaking directly to the 5 students mentioned, his eyes passed over the rest of the class, who looked away in shame. Based on your reactions, I assume the rest of you were at least aware of their plan, said Aizawa, sighing softly. I'm going to set aside a number of issues and just say this, if it weren't for All Might's retirement at the hero scene, only Midoriya, Gyro, and Hagakure would remain students of Class 1A. The rest of you would have been sent home. It's bad enough that the 5 of you went headlong into danger, but the 12 of you who were left did nothing to stop them. A dark chill seemed to pass over the students, but they said nothing. You betrayed our trust, Aizawa continued, even if it was to keep your friends from getting into trouble. In order to regain our confidence, you need to obey every rule to the letter and live as model students. That is all. Enjoy your new home. Izuku looked to see the class around him in utter despondence. He could hardly blame them, and it made him feel even more terrible that they all risked expulsion for his sake. Gathering his resolve, he moved to the front of the group. Listen everyone, he said, catching their attention. I know I've caused you all a lot of trouble, but I want to make it up to you. He pulled out a wad of bills from his pocket. Tonight, we're having sushi, all on me. The class paused for a moment before erupting in cheers, continuing their excited chatter among themselves as they entered the dorm rooms. Izuku stopped Kirishima as he followed them, handing him another stack of bills. What's this for? Asked Kirishima. To replace the night vision goggles you lost, said Izuku. The night you came to rescue me. How did you know? Said Kirishima, surprised. I'm a detective, said Izuku, following the group into the dormitory. The dormitory common area was large and lavish, sporting several couches around a large coffee table over fresh green carpeting. There was a kitchen area with 3 large tables and enough chairs to seat every student in Class 1A. There were large picturesque windows that were lined along the walls, giving them a view to the lush green campus grounds around them. Everyone gathered and chatted excitedly among each other. Each student dormitory holds one class, said Aizawa. Girls are on the right, boys on the left. The entire first floor is a common area. This is where you'll find your kitchen, baths, and laundry rooms. You mean our baths are located in the common space, said Mainta, drooling slightly. Is this heaven? They're separated by gender, and you will behave yourself, said Aizawa dangerously. Yes, sir, squeaked Mainta. The living spaces start on the next floor, Aizawa continued. 4 boys and 4 girls on each level. Everyone gets their own rooms, so you should be comfortable. Your belongings you have sent ahead have already been sent to your assigned room. Go ahead and get unpacked. Izuku sat on the couch in the common area, having just finished unpacking. He was surprised when he had gotten there that most everything was already set up. Bruce had designed and built the building, so he supposed that it shouldn't surprise him that he had something special in mind for Izuku's dorm room. Soon after Izuku sat down, he was shortly followed by Kirishima, Kaminari, Sato, Shiro, Ida, Takuyami, and Mainta. I'm so beat, said Kirishima. Me too, said Shiro. Feels good to be unpacked, though. It's exciting to be living here, said Kaminari. A unified class is the perfect way to increase cooperation and discipline, said Ida. You never relax, do you? Said Kirishima. Hey guys. Ishido, Uraraka, Hagakure, Yaoyorozu, and Gyro came walking down the hall towards them. All done with your rooms, said Ishido. You bet, said Kaminari. We're just unwinding. Well, the girls and I have been talking, and we have a great idea, said Ishido. Let's go around and see who has the coolest room, said Hagakure. Starting with Midoriya. Before he could protest, they all made their way to his dorm room. Izuku sprang up like a monkey from a box and ran after them, the other boys in tow. Wait, he said, jumping in front of them before they could reach his room. You can't go in there yet. Why, what are you hiding? Said Ishido slyly. Let me disengage the countermeasures first, Izuku replied. Countermeasures, said Yaoyorozu, alarmed. Izuku took them to his room but stopped at the door. There was a small panel on the wall next to the door that stood at eye level. It looked to them like a small camera device. Izuku placed his eye right in front of the iris of the camera. After a moment, the sound of several locks turning in their tumblers came from the door. Offensive countermeasures disengaged, said a voice from the panel speaker. Offensive countermeasures, said Ishido. Nothing dangerous, said Izuku quickly before opening the door. They all gasped in awe as they took in the room's contents. The room was small, but it housed a large workstation and monitor reminiscent of the Bat computer in the Batcave, but not as large. Next to the bed were several weights and other workout equipment, as well as a freestanding heavy bag. Look at this place, said Kaminari. It's like a military war room here, said Kirishima. What is that? Said Uraraka. On the far right wall of the room stood what looked to be a large safe. It stood the exact length from the floor to the ceiling, and had 2 large, heavy steel doors that were closed and sealed tightly. Izuku walked forward and placed his hand on a control panel on one of the large steel doors. After scanning his hand, everyone jumped back as the doors began to slide open, revealing a large array of different gadgets, weapons, tools, and various other instruments lining the shelves of the safe. Holy crap, it's an armory, shouted Shiro and Mainta in unison. This is so cool, said Ishido, picking up one of the orbs on the shelf. What is this? Smoke grenade, said Izuku. What about this? Grapple gun. How about this one? Ice grenade. This one? Explosive batarang. This? Explosive gel. You have an alarming amount of explosives here, Midoriya, said Yaoyorozu. The explosives are inert. They won't go off unless they are rigged and triggered, said Izuku. The safe is made of steel, tungsten, and titanium, and the building is reinforced. Still, he picked up the explosive Ishido was carrying and placed it back on the shelf before shutting the safe. Best not to play with them. After examining Izuku's room, the girls, followed closely by the boys, made their way to Takoyami's room. He was resistant at first, but relented after some gentle nudging by Ishido and Hagakure. His room was darkened and illuminated by a purple backlight, lined to the wall with skulls, candelabras, crystal orbs, and other occult-like objects. He began to lose his patience after Kaminari and Kirishima began to examine the sword he kept on the wall, so they left quickly. Next was Aoyama, whose room was filled to the brim with mirrors, jewelry, a disco ball hanging from the ceiling, and even a suit of armor in the corner of the room. His curtains, carpeted rug, pillows, and comforter all were lined with sequins, so the room sparkled brightly around them. The last person on the floor was Mainta. They made their way to the second floor, where they looked in Ajiro's room next, a simple room with only a desk, television, computer, bed, and a small coffee table. Moving on, they made their way to Ida's room, where it was lined wall to wall with books of various subjects, as well as a shelf with over a dozen pairs of the same style of glasses. I expect them all to be destroyed during training, he said when asked about it. Kaminari's room was reminiscent of items one would find in a department store in the 90s, filled to the brim with various hats, shoes, leopard print bedspreads, tiger print curtains, and other strange odds and ends. Koda's room was bright and welcoming, filled with warm colors, stuffed animals, and even a pet rabbit. As their tour of the rooms continued, most of the rest of Class 1 began to join them. Everyone started to get more and more competitive, even those who at first appeared uninterested. Minta brought up the point that so far only the boys had shown their rooms, and motioned that in the spirit of fair play, that the girls had to participate in the contest as well. The girls readily agreed, and an accord was struck. They continued their way to Kirishima's room. As they entered, Izuku could see that if anyone wanted to know about his friend's personality, all they had to do was look at this room, a shrine dedicated to manliness. The walls were lined with posters of his personal hero and inspiration, the Crimson Riot. Like Izuku, he had a freestanding heavy bag, flame-embroidered curtains, comic books, and even a camouflage print bedspread. The group was disappointed by Shoji's room, as it was very sparsely decorated, only a small futon bed and tiny desk, to fit his minimalistic personality. Shiro sported an exotic room, filled with souvenirs and items from various countries across the world, including China, Mexico, and even Africa. Todoroki was next, who had completely transformed his room into a traditional Japanese-style den, including sliding rice paper doors to serve as curtains, soft tatami mats to replace the hardwood flooring, and a roll-away futon for sleeping. The last of the boys was Sato, who had a simple, humble room with a bed, dresser, desk, and television. Upon entering the room, however, they were all besieged with a heavenly smell of the chiffon cake he was cooking in a small personal oven. He explained that since his quirk transformed ingested sugar into raw strength, he had gotten into the habit of fixing his own sweets, as store-bought ones had gotten expensive. He had certainly won the girls over with his expert baking skills, who had devoured his cake in the blink of an eye. With the boys' rooms all viewed and judged, they all made their way back down to the second floor to view the first of the girls' rooms, starting with Gyro. The room was bursting with musical instruments, including drums, guitars, even an electric piano. Hagakura's room was cutesy as cutesy could be, lined with pink and purple drapes, bedspread, stuffed animals that lined the walls and floor, and a heart-shaped mattress frame to go with. Ishido's was artistically decorated to fit her unique personality, with all the items and furniture decorated in matching purple, black, and pink color patterns. Uraraka's room was simple and quaint. She came from a humble household and didn't have much to her name, but Izuku felt that her room had a homey, lived-in feel to it, one that made him feel at ease. As they made their way along, they noticed that Asui's room was next. It wasn't until then that Izuku realized that she had not joined them in the contest. "Sue's not feeling well," said Uraraka. "She went to bed early." They continued on their way, not wanting to bother their friend. But as they passed her room, Izuku had the distinct impression that someone was watching them. As he turned back, he caught a glimpse of Asui, looking at them through the crack in her door before shutting it closed. Last up was Yaoyorozu, who had a huge 4-poster bed that took up most of the space in her room. There was barely any space for a bookshelf and end table. Izuku forgot how rich her family was, so she wasn't used to a space as confined as this one. The walls were lined with expensive paintings and artistic sculptures, the likes of which Izuku had only seen in Bruce's mansion back in Gotham. After they returned to the common area, they all tallied their votes as to who had the best room. Sato won by a landslide, having bought the girls' votes with his chiffon cake. Izuku couldn't help but laugh as Kaminari and Minta argued with him over the results. "Is it over?" said Todoroki. "I'd like to go to bed." "Don't forget to brush your teeth," said Ida. "Wait," Uraraka called out. "Todoroki, Ida, Kirishima, Yaoyorozu, and you too, Deku. Can you come with me? It's really important." Izuku and the others followed Uraraka outside, down the front steps of the dormitory. They all stopped as they saw that Asui was waiting for them. Izuku had a feeling that something was off with her by the way she had distanced herself from them. He supposed now would be the time they got the truth. "Sue said she had something important to tell us," said Uraraka. Asui paused as they stood before her. "You all know that I'm pretty straightforward," she said. "I pretty much say what's on my mind. But sometimes I don't know. I'm at a loss. You know what I said back at the hospital. about how going after Midoriya would break the rules, and he would be acting like villains instead of heroes. Every word, said Todoroki. My heart was hurting, said Asui. And seeing you tonight, Midoriya, made me feel so guilty. I wanted to go with them. I wanted to rescue you too. But I knew that it wasn't the right thing to do, that we could end up putting you in more danger if we went after you. I didn't want to lose any more friends to the villains. I understand Sue, said Izuku, correcting himself. I didn't want you all to get involved either. You could have all been killed. That's why I had to stop them, said Asui. And until this morning, I thought I had stopped you. But it turns out, I was worthless. I wasn't strong enough to stop Midoriya from getting taken. And I wasn't strong enough to stop you from going after the villains, and felt guilty for not going with them. And suddenly, I had no idea what to say. What do you mean? Said Izuku. I don't blame you for that. I didn't think I deserved to joke around and have fun with everyone else, Asui continued, tears streaming down her face. It made me so sad that I couldn't stop my friends from getting hurt, and I couldn't save them when they needed me. What kind of a hero will I be if I can't even stop that from happening? I'm sorry, Tsu, said Uraraka. Me too, said Kirishima. The group of friends all came to comfort Asui as she burst into tears. The weight of her words hit Izuku's heart like a freight train. He hadn't had much time to think about it since he left Gotham, but he realized that his friends had risked everything to come after him, to rescue him from All for One, and those who didn't come after him had almost paid the price for it. Maybe they were feeling guilty and confused, like Asui, or maybe they were just glad they didn't get expelled. One thing was for certain, when Izuku was taken, the villains had taken away their sense of stability, the feeling and confidence that they as a class, as a family, could withstand anything. This isn't going to happen again, said Izuku. Things are going to be okay. Together, Class 1 is strong, and there's nothing we can't handle. And together, we're all going to get stronger. Yeah, said Uraraka. Count on it, said Kirishima. Eventually, the class returned to their dormitories, and everyone went to bed. The test. It was the day of the provisional licensure exam. Izuku and Class 1 were all lined up outside the exam center. His stomach was in knots. This was going to be a culmination of all his training up to this point, where he would finally receive a license to perform hero work. Not that it ever stopped him before, but things were different. He had a quirk now. He could no longer fly under the technicality of a quirkless vigilante as Bruce did. If he was going to become a hero, he had to do things right. He had been preparing for this ever since he had gotten back from Gotham. His training regime had increased tenfold, both in class and at the warehouse. Alfred had stayed behind in Japan to help him with his training. Bruce was back in the States, desperately trying to restabilize Gotham after the Titan attack, all the while attempting to pick up on Jason's trail. So far, though, it remained cold. He had no doubt Jason was alive, but he figured that he wouldn't be found unless he wanted to be. Izuku tried his best to put what happened in Gotham, what happened with Jason, behind him for now. He had to focus on the exam. Aizawa did not mince words when describing the challenge that lay before them. Class 1A and 1B would be separated into different testing areas, where they would face off against hero students from schools across the country. The difference between them, however, was that all the other students there were at least a year ahead of them. Very few first-year students in the country try for a provisional license. The test will be made up of students who have had more time to train and prepare themselves, with powerful quirks that were a mystery to them. And to top it off, the pass rate among the students was extremely low. Needless to say, they would be entering the exam at a severe disadvantage. But Izuku was no stranger to the odds being stacked against him. Aizawa gathered the class around outside the exam center's front steps. If you manage to pass this test and get your provisional licenses, he said, then you novice eggs will hatch into chicks. You'll be semi-pros. I expect your best, he added gravely. I can't wait, said Kaminari. This is going to be so awesome. Let's call it out, guys, said Kirishima. Let's go plus ultra. Everyone started in shock at the loud shout from behind them. A tall young man wearing a different school uniform had sidled up behind them, shouting their slogan with intense ferocity. Followed close behind him were 3 other students, all wearing the same uniforms. Izuku immediately recognized them from Shiketsu High School, the western counterpart to UA High. While UA was considered to be the most prestigious school in Japan due to the fact that it was All Might's alma mater, Shiketsu rivaled UA in how frequently its attendees became pro-heroes. You know, it's pretty rude to barge into other people's huddles like that, Inasa, said a purple-haired Shiketsu student. Please forgive me, said Inasa, bowing so deeply he hit his head on the ground below him. Izuku was taken aback, for when Inasa stood again, his hat had fallen off and he was bleeding from his forehead, though it didn't seem to bother him. He's here, thought Aizawa, interested but not surprised. I wanted to say it just once, shouted Inasa, his eyes burning with fiery intensity. I really love UA High. I am extremely honored to be competing with such incredible students. Let's go, said the purple-haired student, rolling his eyes as he passed. One of the students, a tall, blonde woman, seemed to shoot Izuku a sideways glance as she walked by. The look she gave him made him slightly uncomfortable, but he shook it off. Inasa bowed once again and followed his classmates. What was with that guy? Said Kaminari, shocked. His name is Inasa Yurashi, said Aizawa. You know him, said Hagakure, surprised. Indeed. He's strong, said Aizawa. He's the same year as you. He received the top scores for recommendations to UA High. For some unknown reason, however, he turned down his acceptance to UA and went to Shiketsu. Izuku was surprised. If he had the top score for recommended students, that meant he was stronger than even Todoroki. Eraser, you're here. Aizawa tensed like a cat at the sound of his name. The students turned to see a young woman approaching them, dressed in bright green and orange striped shorts, yellow gloves, and an orange bandana. Izuku recognized her as the pro Ms. Joke, the smile hero. Her quirk was known as Outburst, where she had the ability to force people around her to laugh, restricting their ability to focus and think clearly. I'd recognize that scowl anywhere, she said, smiling brightly as she approached them. It's been a while since we last met in person. She placed her hand on his shoulder in a friendly-like fashion. Let's get married. No, said Aizawa simply. The class stared in shock at how candidly she spoke to their teacher. Ms. Joke erupted in laughter. You're a real laugh riot, buddy, she said. And you're as impossible as I remember. Joke, said Aizawa, not bothering to hide his annoyance. Come on, imagine it, said Joke, undeterred. If I was your wife, you'd have a future full of constant laughter. That sounds like an actual nightmare, said Aizawa, causing Ms. Joke to erupt in laughter again. You two seem close, said Asui pointedly. Our agencies were near each other, said Ms. Joke dramatically. As young heroes trying to make a difference in the world, our love bloomed. Wise, said Aizawa. I do miss your quick retorts, said Ms. Joke, laughing again. You're my favorite person to tease, future husband. Aizawa rolled his eyes. So if you're here, Joke, he said. That must mean your class is here too. That's right, said Ms. Joke, gesturing to the students behind her. They all gathered around Class 1A, each one of them looking starstruck and chattering excitedly. Meet the second years from Ketsubutsu Academy, said Ms. Joke proudly. Class 2, taught by yours truly. I'm Shindo, said a black-haired student. Seems like UA has had a lot of trouble this year, must have been tough for ya. He turned and looked at Izuku. Oh my god, it's you. He started wringing Izuku's hand vigorously. You're UA's first quirkless student, and the guy who took down the hero killer. You're the real deal. The Ketsubutsu students began to gather around him. Izuku began to sweat uncomfortably, overwhelmed by all the attention. I can't believe we get to meet you, said Shindo. You must be especially strong, even after that kidnapping business. Izuku felt his heart sink to his stomach. I beg your pardon, he said. You must have a strong will to have endured such adversity, said Shindo cheerfully. Today I'm going to learn from you. He said that in his pleasant demeanor, but Izuku noticed something odd, a sort of glint in his eyes that set him on edge. Izuku knew enough to trust his instincts that this man's words did not match well with this look. He looked around as the other Ketsubutsu students fawned over his classmates, even asking for autographs. It felt as if they were buttering them up. Izuku had to keep a close watch on them. I forgot how popular we are since the sports festival, said Gyro as they made their way to orientation. Yeah, we're basically celebrities to other schools, said Kaminari proudly. The students continued to chatter excitedly among themselves as they walked, and Ms. Joke's demeanor suddenly turned somber. Didn't you warn your kids, Eraser? She asked, concerned. Aizawa ignored her, following the students into the stadium. Izuku and his classmates quickly changed into their hero costumes and were escorted to orientation, which took place in a large auditorium. On the far end of the room was a stage with a podium and a large jumbotron television above it. Every student who arrived to take the exam was pushed into this room. It was standing room only, and Izuku estimated that there had to be at least 1,000 people here. A tired-looking man slumped his way to the podium at the front of the room. He looked dreadfully disheveled, as if he hadn't slept in days and was ready to collapse at any moment. He gave a large, audible sigh once he reached the podium microphone. Okay, then, he said. Let's do this exam thing. I'm from. He gave a large yawn. I'm from the Heroes Public Safety Commission. Call me Mira. My circadian rhythm is so screwed up. He added, though more to himself as he bowed his head slightly. We're too short-staffed. I'm so tired. Someone should give this poor guy a break, thought Izuku. Mira gave another large yawn. With that confession, let's begin orientation, he said. So about the content of this license thing. 1,540 examinees compete in a free-for-all exercise or whatever we're calling it this year. See, we've got a lot of pros around, and since Stain was arrested, many people have expressed doubts about the status of heroes in society. Izuku flashed back to his battle with Stain. His convictions to ending the current hierarchy of heroes in modern society had spread like a virus. More and more people were adhering to his ideals, believing that a hero who accepts payment for their services could no longer call themselves a hero. In many ways, Stain reminded Izuku of Bruce and his convictions, but there were stark differences in their methods. To Bruce, the mission was everything, and he didn't believe in taking payment for his work, but he would never go to the extreme of murder to achieve his goals. But, when you really think about it, getting paid makes sense, said Mira. If you're going to risk your life to save someone, why shouldn't you be rewarded? That's just the way the world works. God, I could use a coffee, he added, rubbing his eyes wearily. Anyway, whether they're in it for compensation or a sense of duty, we've got too many heroes working together in the streets these days to keep villains at bay. This was a stark reality of hero work. Because heroes were often so generously compensated, it was a career path that everyone flocked to in the early days when licensure was easier. However, this caused overflooding in the market, where there were at least 20 heroes to every villain, sometimes more. It made the streets safer, but it made it far more competitive for new heroes to make it as a career. In most cases, the time when an incident begins and when it's resolved is extremely short, so heroes often had to fight each other for a piece of the pie. You are all here to receive your provisional licenses, so you'll be swept up in this tiresome mess yourselves pretty soon, Mira continued. Those of you who don't have the speed, Frankie, just won't cut it. Which is why that's what you'll be tested on. The Jumbotron above Mira turned on, showing the words number to pass first test, 100 people. The first 100 students to fulfill the requirements will pass today, said Mira. The students all began to chatter among themselves at this news. There are over 1,500 people taking this test, said Yaoyorozu. This means less than 10% of the people here will get a license. Oh man, said Gyro, hugging herself anxiously. I'm getting way more nervous. Well, the world can be pretty crappy, said Mira. I suppose I should say something about luck. So, anyway, here are the basic rules. He pulled out an orange orb the size of a baseball and a small, plate-like device. The examinee will place 3 of these targets on his or her body. He gestured to the plate-like device. As he spoke, the Jumbotron showed an animated example. They can go anywhere you want so long as it's an exposed area. Each of you will also have 6 of these orange balls. The targets are programmed to light up whenever they've been touched by the balls. If all 3 targets are lit up, you're out, and the person who lit up the 3rd target will gain credit for your defeat. You get through this round by taking down 2 people. Izuku was already calculating. This exam was similar to the entrance exam at UA. They were given exactly the right amount of balls to pass, so it didn't leave a lot of room for error. On top of that, they would be going against human beings with quirks, so it would be much harder. Several Mira's assistants began passing out the balls and targets to the students. After we pass out the balls and targets, you'll have a few minutes to get situated after we open, said Mira. Open, repeated Todoroki. As he spoke, the auditorium rumbled loudly, and the roof cracked open at the seams. The gap in the roof began to spread wider until the walls lay flat on the ground around them, revealing that they were standing in a gigantic stadium, even bigger than the one at the UA Sports Festival. The space of the stadium spanned for miles, with 4 different terrains scattered across it: factory, cityscape, mountain, and rainforest. I'm sure each of you have different terrains you like or want to avoid, said Mira. Use your quirks well and do your best. Or not. Whatever. Eraser, your fly is down, said Ms. Joke playfully. Aizawa scowled. Why can I never find a moment of peace and quiet in my life? He thought bitterly. He had attempted to find a nice quiet spot to watch Class 1A in the stadium stands, but Ms. Joke had followed him like a lost puppy. I can't believe you still have 19 students, said Ms. Joke. It's unusual for you not to have expelled someone. You must actually like your class this time. Not really, said Aizawa shrewdly. Don't be embarrassed, said Ms. Joke, laughing. That's so like you. Please date me. No, said Aizawa. But really, you know what's about to happen down there, said Ms. Joke, suddenly serious. And yet, you didn't mention a thing to your class. I don't really see a reason why I should have warned them, Aizawa replied. I doubt it would have changed anything. They're still going to have to overcome this either way. Real heroes can turn this situation around. After the walls of the auditorium dropped and everyone received their targets and balls, every student made a mad dash for their chosen terrains. Izuku's mind was going a mile a minute. If the first people to finish win, then no one will go after their classmates. That meant their best bet at winning was to stay together. Everyone, said Izuku, we need to stick together and fight them as a group. I'm sorry, but I need to go on my own, said Todoroki. It's difficult to use my quirk safely when there are big groups around. Todoroki, Izuku called after his friend, but it was too late. He was already running towards one of the arena terrains. There's no time, Midoriya, said Maita. We need to go. Izuku hated leaving his friend, but they had no choice. They started to make their way towards the mountain terrain. I don't like him going at it alone, said Izuku. How come? Asked Maita. Think about it, replied Izuku. Everyone already knows what powers we have. The sports festival, said Uraraka. They did research. Exactly, said Izuku. They were all able to see us during the sports festival. That means we're at a disadvantage. We don't know what we're up against, but they already know our strengths, weaknesses, and fighting styles. This is going to be a battle of the schools. So what do we do? Said Ishido. Well, the other schools are most likely going to gang up on us, taking advantage of the quirks they know, said Izuku. That's why we have to stick together and watch each other's backs. They stopped in their tracks at the sound of a horn projected across the stadium. The first exam will now begin, said a voice from the speakers. Right on cue, several students from the other schools lunged from their hiding places in the mountain terrain before them. Specifically, students from Ketsubutsu Academy, led by Shindo himself. Here they come, get ready, shouted Izuku. I saw you on TV, said Shindo. You're pretty strong, but you also don't have a quirk. I'm not above taking advantage of that. Following his lead, the rest of the students from Ketsubutsu threw the orange balls at the UA students, raining down a huge barrage hurtling towards them. Izuku had to act fast. Running ahead of the group, he used his quirk to propel himself into the air. Howitzer impact, he shouted. A large explosion emanated from his outstretched hands, causing all the balls thrown at them to be thrown back towards their masters by the sheer force of the explosion. Shindo's smile faded to one of shocked surprise as he lunged out of the way of the incoming balls. Several balls continued past Izuku, but his teammates were ready, using their quirks to dodge, parry, and knock back the onslaught. We can do this, shouted Izuku. Push them back. I thought this kid was quirkless, said Shikui from Ketsubutsu as he shielded himself from the barrage of their own orange balls. He is, said Shindo. Or, at least, he was. Wait, didn't you see the news? Said Ijiro Toki, another student from Ketsubutsu. He's not quirkless anymore, that villain gave him a quirk. Well, said Shindo, smiling. Leave it to UA to be full of surprises. Even still, he can't know how to use it very well in such a short time. It's a good thing we have a plan, said Makabe. After a moment, the orange balls in his hands were replaced with stones. His quirk allowed him to harden non-organic materials, increasing their durability and tensile strength exponentially. He tossed them to Toki, who used his quirk, Boomerang, to throw the hardened orbs into the ground, where they began to travel towards Class 1A. My aim is true, said Toki, and because these projectiles are traveling underground, they won't be able to dodge them in time. Back with Class 1A, Izuku struggled to think where the balls would appear once they reached them. The balls are traveling underground, shouted Izuku. I've got this, shouted Gyro, using her earphone jacks to plug into the speakers on her wrists. Slamming them into the ground, she used her ultimate move, Heartbeat Distortion, to break the ground apart around the Ketsubutsu students. The balls erupted from the broken ground, heading straight for Maita. In a flash, Ishido used her acid to melt the projectiles before they reached their target. Takoyami used Dark Shadow in an attempt to tag Tatami Nakagame, one of the Ketsubutsu students, who barely dodged the attack by using her quirk to telescope within herself. Interesting, said Shino. This isn't the class from the sports festival. It's obvious their training is making them better fighters. Izuku continued calculating. They needed to form a strategy, one where they could protect each other's target areas while simultaneously going on the offensive. He didn't have much data on their individual quirks, and now they had lost the element of surprise by revealing their current proficiency with their own quirks. Back away, said Shindo, crouching down to place both hands on the ground. Their defenses are too strong right now, I'll fix that. The ground beneath Class 1A began to shift. After a moment, large eruptions of earth began to separate them as the ground broke and splintered beneath them. Izuku used his quirk to steady himself as the ground gave way beneath him. Shindo's quirk made him like some sort of an earthquake machine. Now he was trying to separate Class 1A to break their defenses. Izuku would have to take care of him. The ground shook violently as the students who had gathered in the cityscape area. They watched in horror as they saw the mountain spiral crumble beneath the might of the earthquake. "Who has that kind of power?" said one of the students. "And what school are they from?" "Hey, stay focused," said another student. "There are enemies everywhere." As she spoke, a sudden violent breeze began to pick up at a rapid pace. As quickly as it came, the breeze snatched the orange balls right from the hands of the students, swirling in a massive vortex that carried them high up to the top of one of the buildings. Standing at the center of the vortex stood a laughing Inasa. "I believe it is very important for heroes to have passion," he said, almost manically, "and all of you are fighting with it. Thank you. That's one of my favorite things on earth to see. Please let me join your fight and show my own passion." With a great mighty heave, the vortex changed positions, sending the massive orange balls careening down with intense speeds on the helpless students below. In a matter of seconds, they were all disqualified. Izuku coughed violently as the dust around him settled. Shindo's quirk was strong, and now he was separated from the rest of his class. He had to find them quickly to re-establish their defenses. But first, he had to take care of Shindo and his friends. Whoa, Izuku heard. 120 students are disqualified. A single person managed to do that in just one attack. Izuku perked up immediately. 120 people in just one attack. He thought, this was bad. If he or any of his classmates had any chance of passing, he had to end this fast. If he didn't, Izuku's instincts lit up like fireworks as he sensed something approaching. Something fast. He leapt out of the way of the figure instinctively. Flipping around, Izuku saw that it was the blonde girl from Shiketsu High, the same girl that had shot Izuku the strange look before the exam. She wore a black, skin-tight bodysuit and knee-high white boots. He saw that she was holding one of the orange balls in her hand. If he had been a second later in his reaction, she would have tagged him. "Not smart, staring off into space," she said. "Nice try," said Izuku, "but not fast enough." "You couldn't be cooler," said the girl, laughing. In fights where one-on-one combat is expected, most people tend to go after people they've already got a lot of intel on, since it's safest. "That's why I tracked you down. I've taken quite an interest in you." Izuku felt a familiar chill run down his spine. "You sure like to talk," he said. In a split second she threw a rock at Izuku, who dodged deftly, but was put in the way of the oncoming orange ball she had just thrown. Izuku recognized the feint and twisted in midair, kicking the ball away. He repositioned himself from the kick, ball in hand, ready to counterattack. But she was gone. How could she disappear like that? Thought Izuku. Could this be her quirk? Izuku hit the ground hard as he was tackled from behind, his arm with the ball pinned behind his back. "That wasn't my quirk," he heard the girl say, as if reading his mind. "I was just hiding." Izuku felt her press her body against his, feeling her breath on his ear as she spoke. She was toying with him. "It's something the student of Batman is familiar with, I'm sure," she said, disappearing as if in thin air. "It's not a very well-known technique." Izuku's mind raced. If she wanted to tag him, she would have done it by now. She was trying to bait him into doing something stupid. But he knew better. He had to keep her talking while he formed a plan. "So how did you learn it?" said Izuku. "I can't tell you all my secrets," she said, giggling. "Now for my question. Why exactly do you want to become a hero? For honor, pride, or is it for someone else's sake?" Izuku's mind flashed to Kaken. How was it this woman knew so much about him? She was trying to rattle him. He had to focus. "Why?" he said. "What business is it of yours?" "I want to know your secrets," she said. "I want to know your deepest desires, and what scares you." "Some other time," shouted Izuku. He seized his chance, pressing his free hand against the ground and causing an explosion that shot him straight upward. The Shiketsu girl was thrown from his back in surprise. He used his quirk to reposition himself, but before he could attack with the ball, the ground in front of him began to break and splinter. Izuku suddenly found himself surrounded by the Ketsubatsu students. Izuku was outnumbered. He didn't have the luxury to worry about the Shiketsu girl anymore, instead focused mainly on dodging, evading and counterattacking as the Ketsubatsu students pressed their attack. "Are you okay?" came a familiar voice. Izuku turned to see Yaoyorozu standing on a ledge above him, extending her hand. "Quick, take my hand." Before Izuku could reach her, one of the Ketsubatsu students shot an energy attack at her, causing her to lose her balance and fall off the cliff. Izuku reacted instinctively, using his quirk to propel himself towards her, catching her in his arms before she hit the ground, just after he used his quirk to send up a smokescreen between them and Ketsubatsu students. He ran with Yaoyorozu as quickly as he could before finally reaching a safe place to hide. "Sorry," said Yaoyorozu. "I really messed up back there." What exactly did you think was going to happen? Said Izuku. What? Said Uraraka, bemused. Did you think you could catch me unaware? Izuku said. Uraraka has been working hard on her quirk, so hard that she can make herself float now without getting sick. The real Uraraka could have saved herself from that fall without a problem. So tell me, which school are you from? Shiketsu. Uraraka giggled. If you saved me even though you knew I was a fake, did that mean you were trying to use me somehow? She said. Izuku drew back in shock as the Uraraka before him began to melt into a large, gray mass of goo. No, said Izuku, dropping into a defensive stance. Because if you're not Uraraka, you wouldn't have been able to float away to safety. Heroes save anyone in danger, even if they are an enemy. A mouth protruded from the mass of goo, twisting into a smile, before finally reforming into the girl from Shiketsu. But this time, stark naked, as her clothes didn't reform with her. I see, she said. So you're just that good of a guy. Please tell me more about yourself. Everything. What the hell is your problem? Said Izuku. We're in the middle of taking an exam. I'll continue the exam when my mission's complete, said the girl, lunging at Izuku. She was very quick, and he barely had time to dodge, but not before her fingernail scratched him across the cheek. As she continued to press the attack, she stopped as 3 large strands of cellophane stretched between them. Izuku turned to see Shiro using his quirk to separate them. Hey, Midoriya, said Shiro. What's this enviable situation you're in? Uraraka, now. Uraraka leapt upwards from behind Shiro, using her quirk to lunge at the girl from Shiketsu, who bounded backwards deftly, flipping upwards onto a large boulder. She sat on top of the boulder and began to pout. And things were just getting good, she said. Too bad. I really wanted to talk to you some more. Without another word, she leapt off and out of sight. Come back, naked girl, shouted Shiro. Wait, said Izuku. Don't go after her. Why not? Said Shiro in a put-off tone. She's not wearing clothes, but she's not wearing her targets either, said Izuku. She might try to attack us again, and we can't get any points off her. Plus, we'd only be wasting our time chasing her. I guess you're right, said Shiro. Let's go. Not so fast, said Izuku. He walked up to Uraraka. What was the first thing I said to you when you sent me that first text? Huh? My name is Izukumidoriya, you can call me Deku. She recounted, confused. And has Shiro been with you all along? Said Izuku. Since we were separated, Uraraka confirmed. What's going on, Midoriya? Asked Shiro. That girl's quirk is transformation, said Izuku. Just a few minutes ago she transformed into Uraraka's clone. What? Said Uraraka and Shiro in unison. Was she naked then, too, Midoriya? Said Shiro, shaking him by the shoulders. What are you, crazy? Said Izuku, pushing him off. Of course not, she had a costume on. Izuku took a moment to recount his encounter with the Shiketsu girl, not sparing any details. That's freaky, said Shiro. There's no telling how much all these other schools know about us. So what do we do next? Said Uraraka. We need to find the rest of our class, said Izuku. But while we look for them, we have to earn some points. 30 people have already passed, and we need to hurry if we're going to catch up. What would Midoriya do? Todoroki stood in the shadows of the factory terrain section of the testing arena. He had to play this smart. While he was alone, separated from his classmates, the other schools were sticking together, moving around in groups of 10 or more. This meant he was at a disadvantage. He could attack one of them, but the others might rush to defend them, and they had quirks he could not anticipate. He was hoping the schools would fight each other until their numbers were thinned, allowing for Todoroki to swoop in and pick them off. Let's see, said the voice of Mira over the speaker. Where are we now? It looks like 52 no, make that 53 students have passed. Things are moving a lot more quickly. It also looks like 230 examinees have already failed. With less than half the spots left open, now is the time to move. Don't dally now, kids. Todoroki no longer had the luxury of waiting and strategizing. He had to move. Leaving his cover, he began to run further into the factory until he reached an open area. As soon as he was exposed, he saw in his peripheral vision one of the orange orbs careening towards him at a fast pace. Instinctively, he used his fire to torch the orb until it was nothing but a charred lump on the ground. Nice moves, came a voice from above. Todoroki looked to see that he was surrounded by a group of other students, all wearing different colored ninja-like costumes. Izuku recognized them from Seijin High School, one of UA's rival hero schools. Just what we'd expect from the champion of the UA Sports Festival, continued his attacker, a ninja clad in a red suit. I can't believe the great Todoroki is wandering around here all by yourself. You must be really confident. But even if he is from UA High, acting alone is just asking for trouble, said one of the green ninjas. 10 against 1. He doesn't stand a chance, said one of the blue ninjas. This is great, said Todoroki, dropping into a defensive stance. Now I don't have to look for opponents. Well, aren't you cool, said the red ninja. In an instant, the other ninjas advanced on Todoroki, throwing several orange orbs at him. Todoroki threw up a wall of ice to defend himself, and the orbs bounced off harmlessly. Without hesitation, Todoroki used his ice to encase the other ninjas up to their knees, restricting their movements. He didn't dare cover anymore, as it might prevent him from accessing their targets. The red ninja, who was the apparent ringleader of the group, pulled out a small object from his pocket and began to twirl it in his fingers. Todoroki realized it was a bolt fastener. In a flash, the ninja threw the bolt fastener towards Todoroki, who looked in shock as it began to rapidly grow in size. He threw up another wall of ice, which collided with the object just before it hit him. Todoroki surmised that enlarging objects was the ninja's quirk. The ninja began to throw more objects at him, nails, bolts, fasteners, all of which began to grow to immense sizes as they collided with his ice wall. Todoroki dared not use an attack until he was sure the ninja was out of objects to throw at him. He jumped back as the crack in the ice wall grew larger before crumbling beneath the weight of the attack. One of the bolt fasteners flew past the broken ice wall, directly at Todoroki, who used his fire quirk in an attempt to destroy it. The bolt fastener resisted his heat, causing Todoroki to leap out of the way before it struck him. Even if it didn't melt the object, it should have at least left a mark, thought Todoroki, but the bolt fastener was undamaged. Then it occurred to him that it was made of tungsten, a metal with an extremely high melting point. These students were prepared for them. He looked up at the ninjas above him, and the red ninja had already used his quirk to break through the ice that encased him and his allies. It's over, Todoroki, said the red ninja. You thought you could pass this test alone. Your pride will now be your downfall. The other ninjas began to advance on Todoroki. They were all using their quirks at once in an attempt to overwhelm Todoroki, using water to quench his fire quirk, and heavy physical attacks to break his ice defense. They worked out a way to counter everything he had. If he did not come up with an alternative strategy quickly, he would fail. Absently, a thought began to formulate in the back of his mind. What would Midoriya do? Two of the ninjas began to attack him again. One of them had a water quirk, the other was able to shoot a strange soot-like substance from his hands. Todoroki saw his opening, using a huge blast of fire to attack the streams of water and soot directly. But he wasn't trying to fight back against the attack. In a moment, a large explosion of dust and steam erupted around them. The ninjas frantically looked for their enemy in the dense fog, but it was fruitless. Todoroki used the smokescreen to make his way deeper into the factory. He could now see why Midoriya was so fond of using smoke bombs. He approached what looked like a large propane tanker, because the Hero Public Safety Commission constructed this factory to be as realistic as possible. He was guessing that this tanker must contain actual propane. Using his quirk, he punctured a hole in the side of the tanker. His guess was right on the nose, as he began to smell the gas as it escaped from the opening. He used his flames to light up a sign that was next to the tanker. He had to act fast, as his opponents would be on him soon. There he is, shouted the red ninja, pointing to the red light in the fog. He and his cohorts quickly ran towards the source of the light. They had to act fast before he disappeared again. They stopped dead in their tracks as they approached the source of the light, a street sign blazing with fire. Oh no, said the red ninja, horrified. He got us. They heard the sound of ignited flames from behind them. Standing on the factory structures above him stood Todoroki, his left hand set ablaze. In an instant, he launched a fire attack directly at the opening in the propane tank, resulting in a large explosion that sent the ninjas flying in the opposite direction. As soon as they hit the ground, Todoroki used his ice to encase their legs and arms, restricting their movements. To use a move like that, said the red ninja as Todoroki approached. You're crazy. You bastard, you're crazy. Apologies, said Todoroki, placing the orange orbs on each of the targets. But I simply cannot afford to fail. Miss Sai will soon have company. Seiko Intelli, a second-year student from Sei Academy, sipped her tea nonchalantly as she was approached by her classmate. They took up residence for the exam in one of the higher-end office buildings in the cityscape terrain. Her quirk, IQ, granted her a temporary increase in her already high intelligence. In order to use it, her eyes had to be closed, and it required her to drink tea to stimulate it. She wasn't a fighter, and thus had instructed her cohorts to sit back and wait for other students to come to them. It was a statistical probability that at least a few students would reach them before the end of the test, and then they would have the home field advantage. Who is it? Said Seiko. I have confirmed 4 UA students have entered the building. replied her classmate, using her own quirk to bring up a video projection of the security cameras surrounding the building. She recognized them from the sports festival as Tsuyu Asui, the frog student, Mizo Shoji, the arm duplication quirk, Kyoka Gyro, who had sound amplification, and lastly, Momo Yaoyorozu, who had a quirk that allowed her to make things. She would be her biggest threat, but Seiko wasn't worried. The formula she constructed was flawless, and there would be no way they would be able to prevail against her. It appears that our prey has been decided, said Seiko. Please gather the other ladies. Having any luck, Shoji, said Asui. Shoji was using his quirk to duplicate eyes and ears on the ends of his arms, scanning the area around them. They had entered the building in the cityscape area so they could get to high ground in an attempt to find their classmates. Meanwhile, Gyro was using her earphone jacks to listen to vibrations in the building for other students, while Yaoyorozu was deep in thought. It's no use, said Shoji. I can't see anyone from our class. It's most likely they are in another area. I don't want you to panic, said the voice of Mira over the intercom. But so far 56 students have passed. You may want to hurry as your time is running short. So, less than half of the spots remain, said Shoji. We should probably give up on finding everyone, said Asui. We need to fight for ourselves and make sure we pass. That would be wisest, said Yaoyorozu. SHH, said Gyro suddenly. I hear 4 people climbing the stairs, 10 floors below. They're heading this way. Do you think they plan to attack? Asked Shoji. If that's the case, I don't know why there are only 4 of them, said Gyro. All the other schools we've encountered have moved in much larger groups than that. Gyro suddenly reared back, screaming as if in pain, clutching her ears. Gyro, shouted Yaoyorozu and Asui in unison, rushing to her side. Shoji constructed an ear on one of his dupli arms and pressed it to the wall. Someone's playing music, he said. Loud music. It's not too bad for me, but with Gyro's sensitive ears, it must have come as a shock to her. They must know her quirk, said Asui. They targeted her directly to incapacitate her. A coordinated attack, Shoji agreed. This isn't good, said Yaoyorozu. Without Gyro, we can't tell where they are. Asui jumped suddenly as a loud crash sounded from behind her. The window she was standing in front of was suddenly cracked and splintered, preventing her from seeing through it. Someone was shooting at them from outside the building. Everyone jumped behind the stone pillars to keep from being hit by the sniper. They watched as each window before them was hit, resulting in the same spider web cracking and splintering, obscuring their view of the outside world. They were trying to prevent Shoji from using his eyes to get their bearings. Yaoyorozu began to calculate. Their opponents knew exactly who they were, and knew to counter Gyro and Shoji's quirks right off the bat to prevent them from knowing where they were. Likely their plan was to entrap them so they can surround them and attack as a group. What's our next move, Yaoyorozu? Said Shoji. We need to be ready, Yaoyorozu replied. They may already be close by, waiting for the right moment to strike. Then we need to strike first, said Gyro, connecting her earphone jacks to her wrist amps. No, wait, said Yaoyorozu, but it was too late. With pinpoint accuracy, the sniper had shot through the remaining window that Gyro had stepped in front of and shot Gyro's amps right off of her wrists. She fell back, collapsing beneath one of the pillars. Are you all right? Said Yaoyorozu. They got my amps, said Gyro, and my left ear jack. Yaoyorozu confirmed that Gyro's ear jack was bleeding. This was bad. They were able to predict their actions thus far. This meant they probably had a good idea of what they would do next. She knew there had to be up against someone of extreme intelligence and strategic skills. Does it feel colder to you? Asked Shoji. Yaoyorozu didn't notice at first, but she suddenly felt a chill in the air. It seemed to be coming from the vents. Suddenly, the windows grew dark as heavy metal covers slid over them. They were locked in, and the room was getting colder. It's like a freezer in here, said Gyro. Asui, shouted Shoji, suddenly alarmed. He turned to see Asui fall to the ground in a heap. Her friends rushed to her side. She was still breathing, but her breaths were shallow as if she was sleeping. Her body is going into hibernation, said Yaoyorozu, using her quirk to create a heavy blanket. We need to make a fire, said Shoji. Can you make some matches or something? No, it would set off the sprinkler system, said Yaoyorozu, and that would make her colder. I can't make an electric heater, they have control over the electrical system. We have to get out of here, said Shoji. Let's get to the what is that? They turned to see the door to their right glowing red. Whoever was on the other side was welding it shut, further sealing them in. The only exit they had was the blue double doors in front of them. That's the only way out, said Yaoyorozu. We could break through, said Shoji. Our opponents are definitely waiting on the other side, said Yaoyorozu. It's too dangerous. Then what are we supposed to do? Said Gyro. Yaoyorozu had to think. Whoever they were up against seemed to be able to anticipate their every move. She could make an explosive to try and force the welded door open. But that was too risky. She might hurt her teammates in the process. They could try to use brute force, but they had no idea how many of them were really out there since the 4 they counted earlier. They obviously would have considered that a possibility and prepared for it. With one ear injured, Gyro couldn't use her sound attacks to the fullest capacity. For now, they had to do something about the air conditioning. She supposed she could use her quirk to create a sealant to block the vents, but she counted that there were 8 of them. That would use a lot of the lipids in her body, and she wouldn't have enough to defend herself should they decide to attack. "Why aren't you creating anything?" said Gyro. "Is something wrong?" asked Shoji. "This is what they want," said Yaoyorozu. "No matter how many times I look at it, I get the same answer. They want me to use my quirk. Until you can't make anything else," said Shoji. "Exactly," said Yaoyorozu. "My quirk has many applications. They can't have a comprehensive list of all the things I can create, which is why they are doing this. At first, I thought they were using the air conditioning to incapacitate Asui, but I think they're really trying to force my hand to use my quirk enough to exhaust me." "Clever," said Shoji. "But we can't just sit here," said Gyro. "The longer we wait, the less chance we have of passing the licensing exam. We should just charge in and attack. An enemy this smart would have already considered that a possibility and prepared for it," said Shoji. "Okay, then, what do we do?" said Gyro exasperatedly. Yaoyorozu began to feel panic enter her heart. She was in a no-win situation. Her friends were in trouble, and their chances of passing were beginning to dwindle. She had no idea what to do. Her mind suddenly began to drift as she thought of her classmates. What would they do in a situation like this? She thought about the battle training with All Might when they first started school. She remembered how Midoriya had taken Todoroki, Ida, and Kirishima down almost single-handedly. She thought about all the other times she had underestimated him for being quirkless, all the times he surprised her, the gauntlet, the sports festival, and even defeating the hero killer. He was 10 times the hero she was even before he had gotten his quirk. What would Midoriya do in a situation like this? She thought desperately. In the back of her mind, she remembered the things her classmates said to her when he was taken by the villains. "Midoriya saved my life. The hero killer, he crippled my brother. Midoriya knew I would go after him and followed me. He saved me from being murdered that day. Midoriya wouldn't think twice about coming to our rescue if it was one of us. Izuku stepped in to save me when I first met him, before his training. As long as I have known him, he has always been there for those in need, no matter what." It was as if a bolt of lightning had struck her heart, giving her the strength and confidence she needed in this time of crisis. These were her friends, and they needed her to save them, just like Midoriya would. The provisional exam no longer mattered to her. She had to focus on saving her friends. "Everyone, please endure for a few more minutes," said Yaoyorozu. Using her quirk, she produced 4 sets of noise-canceling headphones and passed them to her friends. "What's this for?" said Gyro. "Trust me." Yaoyorozu hunched over and began to use her quirk. This was the first time she had created something like this, but its physical structure wasn't all that complicated. And when it was done, she should still have enough lipids for her to move. She only hoped it would be enough. Seiko sat her tea down on the table next to her. It had been almost 10 minutes since they had been trapped in there. They lasted longer than she had expected, but by now they must have all the fight taken out of them. "It's time, ladies," she said to her friends surrounding her. "Prepare to take them." How utterly delightful, Seiko thought gleefully to herself. "I wonder what we'll find inside." Suddenly, the room around them began to vibrate. Seiko looked around, wondering if it was an earthquake. No, they were too high up. The vibrations began to grow louder by the second. It was coming from the room. Seiko doubled over, clutching her head. The vibrations were so loud that it felt like her head was about to split in two. One by one, her classmates began to drop to the floor around her, each one losing consciousness until only she remained standing. "No," she thought angrily. "Is this some sort of sonic attack?" Yaoyorozu, Gyro, Shoji, and Asui burst through the doors in front of them. The plan had worked. All their opponents were unconscious. Asui had regained consciousness but was still struggling to stand. She, Gyro, and Shoji began tagging the unconscious students while Yaoyorozu stayed back. Producing the amplifiers Gyro used to launch her sonic blast had left her extremely drained. "Come on, Yaomomo," said Gyro. "You need to tag some of these." She looked back to see the door behind them had slammed shut, and Yaoyorozu was gone. "You used your quirk to attack, not defend," said Seiko, locking the door behind her. She had grabbed Yaoyorozu and had thrown her to the floor. She struggled to lift herself up but had obviously used too much of her quirk. "I can't believe a UA student would choose such a high-risk move," Seiko continued, producing an orange orb. But that must mean you can't move now. I may not pass, but I'm going to make sure you don't either. Before she could use the orange orb on Yaoyorozu's targets, the door behind her burst open with tremendous force, and Asui's long tongue wrapped itself around her hands, pulling her away from the helpless Yaoyorozu. But why did you come back? Said Seiko, shocked. Surely you assumed that I had already tagged her. It's the licensing exam. You should be looking out for yourselves. It's not logical. That may be how you roll, but not us, said Gyro. We're obviously different. She's our friend, said Asui. We'd never leave her behind. And we don't give up, said Shoji. Seiko sighed deeply. It was over. She had been defeated completely. Kirishima and Kaminari had made their way to the far end of the cityscape terrain after being separated from the rest of Class 1A. They had found an access ladder that would take them to the overpass above them, and started making the 50 feet up. Kirishima figured that they would have an advantage if they made it to the high ground. There may be a lot of people here, so we need to stick together, said Kirishima. Fine with me. I don't want to be alone, said Kaminari. So what do we do now? Look out, shouted Kirishima, pushing Kaminari to the ground. Kirishima just barely managed to dodge what looked to be like a large lump of clay heading right for him. Looking in the direction it came, he saw the purple-haired Shiketsu student he saw earlier. The clay that was shot at him seemed to double back and reform on the Shiketsu student. What the crap was that? Said Kaminari, frightened. I don't know, said Kirishima. But don't let that stuff touch you. The purple-haired Shiketsu student's eyes narrowed. Not many people can dodge my attacks, he said. Please notice, Shiketsu students keep our hats on when we're working. Why is that? Because each and every one of our movements is crowned by the legacy and honor of our school. Look around me, UA students. Kirishima and Kaminari complied. Strewn all around him were grotesque blobs of clay, but something was off about them. They all had some human features protruding from them, such as a nose, a mouth, hair, and even eyes. Kirishima gasped in horror as he realized that these were other students. This is a demonstration, said the Shiketsu student. Proof of the difference in level between my peers and your vulgar class. We value obligation and dignity, things that appear to be sorely lacking among you. What the heck are you talking about? Said Kaminari. Apparently, he doesn't think much of our school, said Kirishima. Don't misunderstand me, said the Shiketsu student. I have great respect for your school. I take pride in the fact that our institutions are treated as equals. But your class is shameful. You act in a way that disgraces heroes. 3 giant wads of clay began to form around him. He's attacking again, said Kaminari. I don't want to be gross. Calm down, said Kirishima before turning back to the Shiketsu student. You know what? I think you're full of shit. I don't see any proof that you're better than us. How about you show me how you're better than me if you can? Beast, shouted the Shiketsu student angrily. How dare you? Kirishima dodged and weaved as the Shiketsu student threw the wads of clay at him. It looks like training with Midoriya paid off, he thought deftly as he pressed his attack. A look of stunned surprise spread across the Shiketsu student's face as Kirishima landed a heavy haymaker across his jaw, sending him careening backward. Damn it, the Shiketsu student said, trying to stand as his arms were formed with clay. I shouldn't have fallen for such obvious baiting. I see now that you possess an indomitable spirit. The only way to teach you a lesson is by breaking that spirit. Kirishima leaped backwards as more clay wads began to float around them. He had to be careful not to touch them, lest he end up another one of this Shiketsu maniac's victims. Let's get this over with, said Kaminari, using his upgrades to launch 2 electric discs towards the Shiketsu student, who dodged them easily as they embedded themselves in the wall behind him. You should work on your aim, said the Shiketsu student. And your look, for that matter. Perhaps I can make you into something more appealing. You really need to shut up, shouted Kirishima, getting in close and throwing punches at the Shiketsu student, who began to easily dodge and weave. Kirishima stopped as he felt something on the back of his neck, something heavy and moist. You've left yourself exposed, said the Shiketsu student. I had a piece of my clay sneak around beneath us before approaching you from behind. Now, you're mine. Kirishima began to feel as if his entire body was being compressed as the clay began to morph him. Kirishima, shouted Kaminari. No way. Quick, take this, shouted Kirishima, throwing a small container to Kaminari, who caught it clumsily. This is a demonstration, said the Shiketsu student again, dropping the grotesquely morphed Kirishima to the ground. The test has an unusually low passing rate. At first, this seemed counterintuitive, given our current world. With All Might retired, wouldn't it make more sense to flood the streets with heroes? So, I must assume that their goal is to weed out the riff-raff. I must surmise that they are starting to be more selective in order to bring the profession of hero to a higher level. And I agree with this thinking, so I decided to thin the herd myself. You're ignoring the test because you think you're superior, said Kaminari. What are you, a crazy person? I'm simply separating the mediocre and extraordinary, said the Shiketsu student. By the way, he added, stepping in the Kirishima blob. Your comrades still feel pain in this form. Your untamed electricity will torture your friends if you use it. Kaminari could feel himself shake in his boots. This kid was acting like a full-fledged villain. He could almost feel himself having flashbacks to the USJ incident and the summer training camp. As much as he tried, he knew he wasn't as strong or as brave as his other classmates. He didn't even have control over his own quirk. He wished he was more like Midoriya. For the longest time, he didn't have a quirk and still managed to be the strongest in the class. Not only that, but he had only had a quirk for a few weeks and was already using it like he had had it his whole life. He could never hope to compete against that. What do I do? Thought Kaminari. What would Midoriya do? He grasped the canister he held behind his back tightly. It seemed almost familiar to him, as if he had seen something like this before. Thinking back to the contest in the dorm rooms, he felt realization dawn on him as to why. He had seen it before. Midoriya had a bunch of them, and that gave him an idea. Ugh, said Kaminari. You've been hurling insults at us this entire time. I'm starting to take it personally, you know. Then perhaps you are more self-aware than I thought, said the Shiketsu student, forming more clay wads around him. I'd take more time to reflect on your failure. Or you can reflect on this, shouted Kaminari, throwing the container Kirishima gave to him. It hit the ground at the Shiketsu student's feet before erupting in a flash of light, blinding him. What the hell is that? Shouted the Shiketsu student. His eyes were blurred and his ears were ringing from the explosion as he moved around, trying to get his bearings. By the way, big shot, said Kaminari. You've stumbled into a really killer spot. A bolt of electricity shot out from Kaminari's extended finger, arching to the two discs embedded in the wall behind the Shiketsu student. He had moved right into the path of the electric bolt, screaming as the current passed through him. You may think you know everything about us, said Kaminari. But the truth is you don't know anything, only bits and pieces which you've used to form an ignorant theory. If you ask me, you're the one who shames their school. How dare you, said the Shiketsu student, trying to stand from the electric shock. You degenerate. I'll teach you to be more aware of your place, you. A heavy fist collided squarely with the Shiketsu student's face, sending him careening to the ground. His hold on Kirishima was gone. Having fully reformed, he hadn't wasted his opportunity to teach his enemy a lesson. The Shiketsu student hit the ground hard and lay there, motionless and unconscious. Slowly, the other orbs of clay began to reform into the other students. Thanks for the save, Kaminari, said Kirishima. No problem, replied Kaminari. Where did you get that flash grenade? That was Midoriya's idea, said Kirishima. With quirks like this, it's hard for me to get in close enough to attack. This helps even out the odds. He looked back at the other flesh balls as they began to take form. Look alive, Kaminari, he said, producing an orange orb. We've got targets. Want some gum? Said Ms. Joke. It's really a finger trap, isn't it? Said Aizawa, not taking his eyes off the field. I hate this. It's frustrating that we can't tell who passes and fails in real time. And Shindo made it worse by splitting the ground open, said Ms. Joke, blowing a large bubble with her gum. Now it's hard to see anything. Wait, she added, laughing. Eraser, are you actually worried? No, said Aizawa. There's something I've realized after watching my students, in school and in the field. They may not have realized it themselves, but in Class 1A, there's one person whose spirit has had a big impact on them. He doesn't consider himself a leader, and he doesn't care about being the most popular. But time and again I've watched his passion spread to the rest of his peers. It's strange, but whenever there's some kind of major event, he is always at the center of it. I'm not worried, Joke. I can't wait to see what they'll do. Even if he isn't physically with the others, his presence raises the standard for the entire class. You've fallen hard for them, Aizawa, said Ms. Joke. I'm honored to have them as students, said Aizawa. Izuku, Shiro and Uraraka took cover in a large crater, serving as a makeshift foxhole. The break in the fighting had stopped, but Mira had continued to announce passing students over the intercom. Spots were quickly filling up, and they still had no idea where the rest of their class was. And what's more, Izuku could almost feel that the Shiketsu students were nearby, waiting to make their move. And they wouldn't underestimate them this time. This is bad, said Shiro. Yeah, said Izuku. I know we'd be in trouble if we got split up. But at least we can probably do something about the group that is near us, and maybe even make a few points. Really, said Shiro. How do you figure? Some of them have been attacking too soon, said Izuku. They're panicking that they won't get enough points in, so they make poor decisions in the moment. Because they're attacking in a group, they'll most likely end up fighting over their targets the longer this goes on. So that as the spots continue to fill up, they'll break apart from their groups and become more vulnerable, right? Said Yaoyorozu. But if we stayed together as a course, wouldn't we be in the same boat? Asked Shiro. Not necessarily, said Izuku. Many of our classmates have restraining type quirks, such as you, Minta and Todoroki. I was hoping that if we stayed together, we could restrain enough targets for all of us to pass. It's much easier tagging a still target than hitting a moving one. You make it look so easy with your batarangs, said Shiro. It's anything but, said Izuku. But think about it, that's the whole point of the test. If it was simply target practice, the only thing they could discern from that is that we're good shots. They want us to use our quirks to outthink our opponents, getting them into a position where we can tag them. I see, said Shiro. There's a lot more to this test than I thought. Wait, said Yaoyorozu, perking up. Listen, they're getting closer. Izuku turned on his detective vision and his cowl. Sure enough, there were several body signatures heading their way. They had to be from Shiketsu. They would be on them in a moment. What should we do? Said Shiro. Well, you and I are going to be decoys, said Izuku. What? Are you crazy? Said Shiro. We need to restrain them in order to tag them, said Izuku. And they're not just going to let us do it. We need to distract them and lure them into a trap if we're going to win this. And I think I just might have a plan on how to do it. Todoroki sat on a bench in the anteroom with the other applicants who had passed. They were watching the last part of the test from the jumbotron above them. Mira had announced that 70 people had passed. That meant space was now limited, and Todoroki hadn't seen any of his other classmates yet. He began to grow worried. Todoroki, came a familiar voice. He looked up with relief to see Yaoyorozu, Asui, Jiro, and Shoji walking his way. I'm glad to see you passed, said Yaoyorozu. I didn't doubt you, said Asui. Have you seen the others? No, said Todoroki. So far, we are the only ones here. They're cutting it close, said Shoji. But we can't count them out yet. I thought Midoriya had everyone working together, asked Todoroki. That was the plan, said Yaoyorozu. But we got separated when one of the other applicants used an earthquake quirk. I'm surprised that Midoriya hasn't passed yet, said Jiro. Only 30 spots left, they don't have much time. No doubt Midoriya is attempting to make sure everyone else passes the test as well, said Shoji. I hope they all pass, too, said Asui. We've faced impossible situations before, said Todoroki. And if Midoriya is out there with them, I have no doubt that our classmates will be joining us soon. Izuku, Shiro, and Yaoyorozu found themselves in the middle of a veritable war zone. Izuku and Shiro dodged and weaved through the endless onslaught of applicants as they tried to tag them. But that was exactly what Izuku and Shiro were hoping for. The closer the other applicants got to them, the closer they drew to their trap. It's almost time, shouted Izuku. Grab on, Shiro. Shiro followed suit, grabbing onto Izuku's outstretched hand. Izuku used his other hand to draw his grapple gun, using it to propel Shiro and himself away from the crowd. Yaoyorozu now, Izuku shouted. Yaoyorozu, hiding in one of the craters, released her quirk on her command, causing the boulders that were suspended in midair to come crashing down. Each boulder had a long line of Shiro's tape attached to it. Once they came down, they brought the tape down upon the other students, pinning them to the ground like flies to a fly trap. We better hurry, said Shiro, producing the orange orbs. Others might be coming for us soon. Hey, said one of the applicants. Can't you give us a break? You're still first years, and we have to get our licenses this time. I'm sorry, said Izuku, producing the orbs of his own. But so do. Izuku was interrupted by a bright light flashing upwards from the center of the arena. He recognized it immediately as Aoyama's naval laser. He was sure of it. It's Aoyama, said Yaoyorozu. She had already tagged the other applicants, passing the exam. Already her targets were telling her to go back to the anteroom with the other successful applicants. Midoriya, what are you waiting for? Said Shiro. Tag the targets so we can pass. Izuku hesitated. If Aoyama was there, then his other classmates might be there too. What's more, with so few spots left, they may not have enough time to pass, especially with the rest of the examinees continuing to bear down on them, as the others had with them. You guys go, said Izuku. Tag as many as you can and get to the anteroom. Hopefully, others will have passed by now as well. What are you doing? Said Yaoyorozu, alarmed. I'm going after the others, said Izuku. Before they could protest, Izuku used his quirk to propel himself towards the light of the naval laser. He knew he was taking a big risk, not taking the chance he had to tag the targets and pass, but he couldn't help himself. If he was going to pass today, he had to make sure that every one of them passed as well. Aoyama was crouched and hiding under a small ledge created when the ground broke apart. He was separated from his classmates and no longer had the strength they as a group afforded him. He knew he was not the strongest in their class. He made it into the hero course, yes, but only by the skin of his teeth, and was the worst performing out of all of them. He didn't have Yaoyorozu's intelligence, Kirishima's spirit, Todoroki's talent, or Midoriya's unhindered ability. He didn't have what it took to pass this test. The gust of wind brushed against him, causing him to jump in fright. He didn't know if he could defend himself against the other applicants, let alone tag them with the orange orb, but he readied himself for battle nonetheless. But instead of an enemy, he was met with the familiar sight of Tenya Ida. "Aoyama," he said, "I'm glad that I found you." "Bonjour," said Aoyama. "Are you out here alone?" "What a coincidence, so am I. I've been trying to find as many of our classmates as I can," said Ida. "There's a handful of us gathered nearby, but I came to look for stragglers." "You left the group just to help the others," said Aoyama. "How do you think you'll find people out here? And what are you going to do if everyone left behind passes without you?" "First of all, I found you, didn't I?" said Ida. "And I'm hoping everyone passes the test." "That would be wonderful. As class rep, it's my duty to lead the others. Obviously, I want to get my provisional license, and the test will be coming to an end soon, but I'll continue to search for the others while trying to pass. You have to work with me." They were interrupted by a large explosion as several other applicants began to close in around them. One of them lunged directly for Aoyama, orange orb in hand, but Ida managed to grab his cape and pull him out of the way. "There's too many of them," shouted Aoyama. "You have to leave me." "What are you talking about?" said Ida. "Giving up is not an option. If we stay here, we're sitting ducks. Hold on tight." In a burst of speed, he took off, carrying Aoyama behind him in tow. Things weren't looking good. Mira continued to announce the dwindling spots every few seconds, and their other classmates were nowhere in sight. And yet, Ida still continued to fight to protect his friend and find any of their other missing classmates. Aoyama felt shame creep into his heart at his cowardly hiding while his friends and classmates fought just to defend themselves against the horrible onslaught of the other applicants. It was time for him to do something. It was time to stand out. He detached himself from Ida, who looked at him in surprise as he leaned backward, lifting himself into a bridge position on his hands and feet, and fired his naval laser directly into the air above him. "What are you doing?" said Ida. "I'm standing out," said Aoyama. "Yes, you are," said Ida. "But why?" "Our enemies will be upon us soon," said Aoyama. "While I've got the spotlight, you can use your speed to sneak up on them and tag them." "You're gonna sacrifice yourself," said Ida, alarmed. "You can't. There's no time," said Aoyama. "You need to hurry." Ida was at a loss. He could see the other applicants running towards them. He could easily use his speed to tag enough applicants to gain a passing score, but he didn't dare leave his friend unattended. He was defenseless and would surely fail. He didn't know what to do. What would Midoriya do? He couldn't be sure if he imagined it or not, but as if on cue, he could swear he could hear Midoriya now. Howitzer impact. A large explosion erupted around them, causing the charging students to fly back from the force. Ida looked up to see Midoriya coming crashing down towards them, throwing batarangs and explosives in every direction as the students tried to approach them. "Midoriya," said Ida. "Heads up, guys," said Midoriya. "The cavalry's here." As he spoke, Ida looked up to see an army of various birds swarming on their position, attacking the other examinees. Ida immediately recognized it to be the work of Koda's animal Quirk. As the birds continued to swarm, the remaining students from Class 1A emerged from their collective hiding places. Takoyami used Dark Shadow to force the remaining examinees back, while Minto was throwing his sticky balls in every direction, with Ajiro knocking them over to stick them to the ground. Hagakure was using her special move, Warp Refraction, to shine a blinding light around the applicants. As the pandemonium ensued, Izuku and his classmates continued their barrage. One by one, he and his classmates began tagging the restrained examinees. They could hear Mira over the speaker calling off the remaining spots. 10 spots left, 8 spots left, 5 spots left, 1 spot left. At last, the first exam came to a close as Aoyama tagged the final student. The final signal sounded over the speakers as Class 1A cheered in triumph. It was only Aoyama that looked sullen. "I don't understand," said Aoyama. "Why would you come for us?" "We were getting desperate," said Ishido. "We didn't know where everyone was until we saw your belly button laser. Thanks to you, we were able to find each other and win this." "I didn't do much," said Aoyama. "You should have left me." "It doesn't matter what you do," said Izuku. "If you had done nothing, then the rest of us wouldn't have passed." "We don't give up on each other," said Ida. "That's not what we do." "Well," said Aoyama, "I guess this means my twinkling won't have to stop after all." No, said Ida. Keep twinkling, whatever that means. Izuku and the rest of Class 1A made their way back to the anteroom, celebrating their victory along the way. Izuku couldn't have been happier, but he knew that this was only half the battle, and the next test would be even harder. But he still could not suppress his jubilation. He only wished that Bruce was here, and Alfred, All Might, and most of all, he wished that. So you passed, came a voice from behind him. Izuku turned to see the voice and nearly jumped out of his skin. Kaken, Izuku said incredulously. There he was, his childhood friend, standing before him, just as he remembered him. Spiky blonde hair, wearing a black junior high school uniform, his glaring gaze seemingly staring right through him. Since you have my quirk, I can't say I'm surprised, Kaken continued. Good to see you're not screwing it up completely. How are you? Izuku stammered. Remember what I told you, said Kaken. Don't you lose. Whatever happens, don't you dare fucking lose. Kaken, Deku, said Uraraka, walking up behind him. Uraraka, said Izuku. Who are you talking to? She asked. I was just. Izuku turned back towards his friend, but Kaken was gone, leaving him even more confused than he was before. Deku, Uraraka asked again. Are you okay? Yeah, said Izuku. Yeah, I'm fine. Let's go, the others are waiting for us. Izuku continued walking with Uraraka, his previous jubilation gone. He was shaking, trying to process what he had just seen. He knew that because he had his quirk, a part of Kaken still continued on inside him, like a memory. But neither Jaeon or Bruce said anything about this. Seeing him in his mind was one thing, but while conscious in reality, could it have been the shapeshifting girl from earlier? Unlikely, she couldn't have known about Kaken. And it was the last words he said to him that really shook him. Don't you lose. These words gave Izuku an uneasy feeling. He couldn't put his finger on it, but whatever Kaken meant, he didn't think that it was meant to be threatening. No, he was sure that he was trying to warn him of something. What that warning was, however, he had no way of knowing. One thing was for certain, whatever happened next, be it in the licensure exam or after, Izuku knew he had to be ready. Rescue exam. The first test of the provisional licensure exam had officially ended. Only 100 of over 1,500 applicants made it through, with UAS Class 1 among them. It had been pretty close, but Izuku was happy to see that all of his classmates had made it to the next test. However, at this moment, the last thing Izuku was thinking about was the exam. He was still shaken by what he had seen before reaching the anteroom. Had Kaken really appeared to him? Was it because of what Jaeon had said, how an imprint of himself was living inside his quirk? And what did he mean? Was he trying to tell him something? His mind began to buzz as his analysis continued. Midoriya. Izuku jumped as he felt the hand of Ida on his shoulder, trying to get his attention. He didn't realize how deep in thought he was, a habit that still carried over despite his training. Sorry, said Izuku. What did you say? They're about to announce the next test, said Ida. Are you alright? I'm fine, thanks, Izuku lied. Let's see what they have to say. All right, came the tired voice of Mira over the speakers. For those 100 of you who passed the first exam, please draw your attention to the screen. The jumbotron above the applicants came to life as an image of the testing arena appeared on the screen. Then, to the shock of everyone in the room, large explosions began to emanate from the arena around them. Buildings began to fall, mountains crumbled, turning to craters and rubble, leaving the once pristine arena looking like a war zone. There is only one test left in the exam, said Mira. Your goal is simple. Undertake rescue exercises and save the bystanders from these disaster areas. Treat this like the real thing. It will help us gauge your ability to carry out successful rescue procedures once you obtain your provisional licenses. Izuku began to understand. Now that they were tested on the strength of their quirks, strategy and fighting prowess, now they were going to be tested on their ability to save innocents from disaster scenarios. What's that on the screen? Said Sato, shocked. As he said it, various people began crawling out of the rubble, including men, women, children, and even the elderly. Izuku was shocked. Surely, they didn't intend on bringing in actual civilians for this exercise. That was extremely dangerous. Don't worry, said Mira. These are specialists from the Help Us company. They have been trained as professional rescuees. They will be dressed up as civilians and will be placed across the disaster site. We'll be judging how well you keep them safe as you go about your mission. Izuku had heard of companies like this. It was the kind of job you never would think about, but a necessary one, considering the sheer number of hero training courses like theirs that were across the country. Not only this, but they were also used by other law enforcement and rescue agencies, such as the police and fire departments, in an effort to train and prepare them for rescuing and handling citizens while on the job during a myriad of crises. You'll be graded on a point system, Mira continued. If you have more points than the benchmark at the time this exercise comes to an end, then you pass the exam. We'll start in 10 minutes. Take care of any and all preparations now. This looks familiar, said Ida. It looks like Kamina Ward, Izuku agreed. He wondered if this exercise was based on the final battle between All Might and All for One. The event haunted Izuku, even to this day. Seeing such destruction before him, even though he knew it was staged, caused a chill to run down his spine. Perhaps it's similar, said Ida. But back then our only goal was to get you away from the villains safely. All Might, Batman and the other pros handled the rest. And there were still many casualties. Not this time, said Izuku. We'll rescue them all. As the timer countdown began, the applicants conversed with each other, going over strategy, preparing for the exam, and some making friends. The Shiketsu students made their way over to Class 1A. Their leader, Mora, who was a large student hidden beneath a massive amount of hair, had wanted to apologize to Kirishima and Kaminari for his classmates' actions during the exam. Todoroki noticed Inasa, the student Aizawa mentioned, seemed to shoot him a sideways glance. He normally wouldn't have noticed or cared, but Inasa had been glaring at him since he had entered the anteroom after completing the first test. This look in particular seemed to shoot right through him, one of intense hatred. Todoroki, said Inasa as he walked past. Wait, said Todoroki, I can't ignore the looks you've been giving me. Did I offend you somehow? Oh, I'm sorry, did I hurt your feelings? Asked Inasa. There wasn't an ounce of sincerity in his voice. Well, the thing is, son of Endeavor, I just can't help but hate the both of you. Todoroki was taken aback, stunned by how much animosity Inasa had for him. You've changed a little bit since the first time our paths crossed, Inasa continued. But you definitely still have your father's eyes. With that, he turned on his heel and marched away, leaving Todoroki at a loss for words. Izuku began walking over towards Todoroki to see what was wrong when he was suddenly accosted by Mineta and Kaminari. Midoriya, they shouted in unison. Whoa, guys, what's going on? Said Izuku, genuinely startled. Don't play dumb with us, said Kaminari. What devious things were you doing with that hottie while the rest of us were trying to survive? Said Mineta, pointing to the shapeshifting Shiketsu student from the exam. In response, she simply smiled and waved at him. The boot fits, shouted Mineta. Just how plus ultra did you go with her? Zero, you loudmouth, Izuku cursed inwardly before speaking aloud. It's not like that, you guys, he said. She's a shapeshifter and she almost cost me the test. Don't lie to us, Midoriya, said Kaminari. As the three of them continued to argue, Izuku noticed out of the corner of his eye something odd. Orca was staring at him with a strange look on her face, one that he couldn't quite place. When he looked at her, she turned and walked away. Before Izuku could follow her, the sound of an alarm rang throughout the anteroom before Mira came on the speaker. Villains have performed a large-scale terrorist attack across insert city name here, he said, not bothering to come up with a city name. Since most buildings collapsed, there are many injured. Sounds like a background story, said Asui. Does that mean before she could answer, the walls of the anteroom came crashing down, just like in the previous test, placing them smack dab in the middle of ground zero of the disaster area. Looks like we're starting, said Izuku. Due to destroyed roads, first responders have been delayed, continued Mira. Until emergency services arrive, the heroes will take over the rescue effort. Your task is to save as many people as you can and help the injured. Good luck. The 100 remaining applicants stormed out onto the testing arena. Class 1A stayed together, just like last time. Izuku calculated that it was less likely the other applicants would attack each other as it was in the last test. Rescuing citizens was the key to gathering points, but they were in the dark about how the points were actually accrued. All they could do was work together and follow their training until they had a better idea of how to garner enough points to pass. Let's head to the closest urban area, said Ida. We need to work as a team as much as possible. Everyone stay alert, said Ajiro. There may be falling debris around. Izuku stopped in his tracks. The earpiece on his cowl was picking up a sound several clicks east of his direction. It sounded like a child crying. Turning on his cowl vision, he could see a small signature in the middle of a crater surrounded by fallen debris. What's wrong, Midoriya? Said Ida. I see someone, said Izuku. Follow me, they need help. As the class approached the crater, they found the source of the crying, a small young boy in a blue baseball hat, hanging his head. Help me, said the boy. My grandfather's crushed under the rubble. This looks bad, said Kaminari. Where is he? This looks bad, repeated the child, lifting his head. The boy was revealed to be a small man instead, looking angrily in Kaminari's direction. That's points off your score. The first thing you should do is see how bad my injuries are and if I can walk. Said Kaminari, flabbergasted. Didn't you see that I'm bleeding from my head? The man-child continued angrily. A licensed hero should be able to assess this in an. Let me examine your wounds, please, said Izuku, stepping in. He pulled up his gauntlet computer, which projected a holographic image of a male human figure. Both the man-child and his classmates looked in awe as Izuku began to work. What is that? Said the man-child. It's a tool that will allow me to assess your symptoms, said Izuku. What are you currently feeling? Difficulty breathing, said the man-child. Dizziness. My leg hurts too. You could have a punctured lung, said Izuku. We need to be careful when moving you. Let me examine your head. Izuku examined the wound. Even though it was fake, he took meticulous care in treating the wound as if it was real. I'll take care of him, Izuku said to his classmates. The rest of you, look for his grandfather under this rubble. Be careful, the area is filled with hazards. The rest of the class immediately complied, fanning out in search of the man-child's grandfather. Izuku finished his examination, drawing several bandages from his utility belt and began field dressing the wounds. Are you able to walk? Asked Izuku. No, my leg is broken, said the man-child. Izuku grabbed a small piece of wood discarded to his right and made a makeshift splint, tying it to the man-child's leg. I'm going to carry this boy to the first aid station, he said to the others. Keep going on without me. Izuku picked up the man-child and ran towards the first aid station while the man-child continued his fake crying. You're going to be fine, said Izuku as he ran. Though he appeared calm on the outside, he was trembling. Batman had drilled him on various field medical practices from first aid to military paramedics. It was one thing in theory, but nerve-wracking in practice. This exam made his thoughts fly back to his fight with Muscular and Deathstroke during the summer training camp. At the time, all he could think about was saving Kota and staying alive. Now the casualties were judging him on every wrong move he made, which could potentially cost him his provisional license. He was just glad there were no villains around. Hiroraka watched as Izuku took off with the injured man-child. Since the first exam had ended, her heart felt like it was buzzing out of her chest. Seeing Izuku with the Shiketsu girl had awakened feelings in her that she wasn't prepared to feel during the exam. At the least opportune moment, she couldn't deny that she had feelings for Izuku. They had been best friends for over a year, since he had helped her on the street from that mugger. But he lived in a completely different world than she did. He was giving everything he had to not just pass the exam, but making sure that the rest of them passed. This selfless nature is what she admired most about him. He was willing to throw himself in harm's way, and was willing to sacrifice what he wants most, so that others can get what they want the most. She remembered what Himiko Toga told her back in the forest. You've got a crush on someone. So do I, and I bet you also want to be exactly like that special person. Huh. Her words tore right through her heart, as she never expected such truth to come from a villain. Mira sat in the announcer's box high atop the stadium, watching the students below as they went about the exam. It's been 10 minutes so far, he said. Everyone's doing well for the most part. But what's a test without a few surprises? He turned and nodded to the large man standing behind him. He stood at least 8 feet tall, was dressed in a black pinstripe suit that did little to hide his impressive and intimidating physique. Several others dressed in black combat gear stood behind him, and one by one they began piling out of the room, heading to the arena floor to do their part. For the second test, every examinee starts out with 100 points, and they are judged on how many they lose. The Help Us Corporation members will judge people based on whether or not they are acting properly during their rescue. Additionally, there are 100 employees of the Public Safety Commission who grade each person individually based on the scoring manual and the examinee's background in an effort to win back points. Students automatically fail if they reach below 50 points. This meant they had to have the patience and discipline to make smart decisions in the heat of the moment. I hope they didn't think this was going to be straightforward, thought Mira. The students were doing well, but in order to help citizens in need, they have to multitask. They can't just rescue. They have to adapt to every situation thrown at them. Class 1 was working tirelessly to rescue the Help Us Company workers from the impact zone, splitting up into smaller groups and going to the different areas where their quirks would be most beneficial. With each rescue it was like a different test, and the HUC workers continued to drill them in all their decisions and choices. It was like an intricate puzzle where they were penalized for wrong answers. They all had to use their knowledge and work together in order to succeed. They knew that if they tried to do it on their own, they would easily run out of time and points. But working together is what Class 1 did best. Izuku, Ida, Kirishima, and Sato continued to carry wounded to the safety zone when a large explosion nearly knocked them off their feet, creating a gaping hole in the side of the arena wall. Izuku rallied, drawing a batarang while using his other arm to hold the HUC member upright. Something wasn't right, and he had seen enough to know to be ready. A villain has completed another large-scale attack, said Mira over the speakers. As he spoke, a large, imposing creature stepped through the wall, surrounded by men and women in combat armor. Izuku recognized the creature immediately as Gang Orca, the killer whale pro hero. "Tell me, wannabe heroes," said Gang Orca. "Can you rescue and fight at the same time?" He gestured to the armed guards standing behind him, who began to enter the arena and sweep the area. "Stay together," shouted Izuku to the other examinees around him. Immediately, Izuku and the others circled up, forming a protective area around the HUC workers as Gang Orca's horde began to swarm. "Now what will you do?" said Gang Orca. "Will you fight or protect? Will you help or run away? What would a hero do?" As the Orca villains continued to advance on the injured HUC workers in the first aid zone, Izuku and the others readied themselves for the onslaught. They would have no choice but to fend off as many as they could while the HUC workers tried to escape. Immediately, Shindo from Ketsubutsu ran forward past Izuku. "Get everyone to safety," he shouted. "I'll hold them off." As he tried to use his earthquake quirk to knock the charging thugs off balance, it was ultimately fruitless. Gang Orca rushed forward and used his quirk to produce a hypersonic wave, knocking Shindo backwards and rendering him unconscious. "A single rear guard to stand against us," said Gang Orca. "You've underestimated me." Izuku began to throw his batarangs, but Gang Orca was able to toss them aside as if they were made of tin foil. Izuku found it difficult trying to hold the injured while fighting, and with Shindo out of commission they were at a severe disadvantage. As Gang Orca marched towards his prey, he turned suddenly to the right, using his hypersonic wave to shatter a pillar of ice that was thrust upon him. Izuku turned to see Todoroki engaging Gang Orca, while Ajiro, Takoyami, and Asui ran towards the HUC workers, helping them evacuate. As Todoroki's ice began to entrap the villains around him, Gang Orca increased the power of his hypersonic wave, shattering the ice and freeing his comrades. Todoroki could see why he was the number 10 pro hero. Suddenly, the air around him grew cold as the wind began to pick up. Todoroki looked up to see Inasa flying towards their position. "I'll blow you evildoers away," he shouted, blasting a large gust of wind to blow away several of the villains. His gaze grew from passion to anger as his eyes fell upon Todoroki. "Of course you would be here," he added spitefully. "Go help with the rescue." "I'll take care of this," said Todoroki. He knew that his chances of winning against Gang Orca were slim, but he didn't want Inasa's hatred for him to complicate the situation. Todoroki threw a blast of fire towards the pro hero, but his flames were stunted as it was met by a large gust of wind. "Why did you use fire?" shouted Inasa. "The heat makes the air rise up." "Because he didn't fall to my ice earlier," shouted Todoroki. "You ruined my shot on purpose, didn't you?" "What? It was you who blocked me so you would get all the glory," Inasa shouted back. "Why would I do something like that?" Gang Orca and his villains watched in disbelief as Todoroki and Inasa continued to bicker. While distracted, the villains raised the guns mounted on their arms, firing upon Todoroki and Inasa. Todoroki hit the ground hard, a sticky glue-like substance forming where the blast had hit him. He and Inasa hit the ground hard as they struggled against the glue. "Outrageous," said Gang Orca. "I can't believe you're fighting each other when you should be fighting us." "Now look what happened," said Inasa. "It's all your fault, son of Endeavor." "What is your problem?" said Todoroki, struggling against the glue. "My old man has nothing to do with this." "He has everything to do with this," said Inasa, struggling to his feet. "You're no different from your father, filled with an insatiable anger and hatred. I saw the same look on you at the recommendations exam at UA. You're the reason I didn't go to UA." Todoroki remembered. He was surprised and ashamed that he didn't remember sooner. Inasa had beaten him at the recommendations exam, but all Todoroki could focus on was rejecting his father, and Inasa was in his way. He had tried so hard to fight against who he was that he was acting like the very person he worked to reject. And now that was catching up to him. As Todoroki struggled to his feet, Inasa rose into the air with his wind quirk, trying to stop Gang Orca, who threw a hypersonic blast towards him, causing Inasa to shriek in pain, falling from the sky and hitting the ground hard, and lay motionless. Todoroki tried to rush to Inasa's aid when a large hand grasped around his neck. Gang Orca drew him in close and used his hypersonic wave at close range. Todoroki felt as if his entire mind was being flayed. His limbs failed him, hanging by his throat in Gang Orca's massive hand. He could feel his vision doubling as he began to lose consciousness. "Go destroy the evacuation center," shouted Gang Orca. The villains began to advance on the remaining examinees as they continued to evaluate the HUC workers. In a few moments they would be on them. Suddenly, a large explosive blast engulfed Gang Orca, causing him to drop Todoroki. He struggled to look up from the ground, seeing Izuku burst through the smoke, throwing every bomb, battery, sticky and ice grenade he had at the horde of villains before finally locking horns with Gang Orca himself, who tried to use his hypersonic wave. But Izuku stood tall. "That won't work on me," said Izuku, tapping the protective earpieces of his mask. "Midoriya," said Todoroki weakly. "What are you guys doing?" shouted Izuku at Todoroki and Inasa while continuing his battle with Gang Orca. "Quit fighting each other and fight together." Todoroki and Inasa watched as Izuku and the other examinees fought against Gang Orca and his villains. Even from the distance apart they lay, they were able to share a glance of understanding. Though neither of them could move from Gang Orca's attack, they began to use their quirks in sync, Todoroki's fire mingling with Inasa's wind to form a fire tornado that began to engulf their enemies. "Well now," thought Gang Orca, "it appears that even though they can't move, they're still using their abilities in tandem to defend against the attack. Precise control merging with raw power. This won't make up for their earlier mistakes, but it's a start." As the flames continued to engulf Gang Orca, Izuku turned his attention to his thugs firing their clay guns. As more and more HUC workers were rescued, more and more examinees came to join them in their fight. The battle raged, flames and wind blazing around the arena as the villains fell beneath the might of the examinees. At last, the final buzzer sounded, signaling the last of the HUC workers having been rescued. The exam was over. Izuku could hardly believe he was holding his provisional license in his hand. The exam had been grueling, and the pass rate had been brutal. Due to their actions during the last test, Inasa and Todoroki were among the few that didn't pass, with Todoroki. Izuku felt bad for his friend for being the only one in the class to fail the exam. However, because they passed the first exam, both he, Inasa, and any others who failed would be given a chance to pass a remedial test, which would allow them to get their provisional licenses. Inasa had taken the first step forward and apologized to Todoroki for his behavior. The two of them seemed to have patched things up, and everything worked out. Izuku stared happily at his provisional license, wiping away tears. All of his training, all of the hell he endured, everything had accumulated to this moment. Quickly pulling out his phone, he took a picture of the license and sent a message to his mother, Bruce, Alfred, Dick, Barbara, Melissa, and even All Might. He received an onslaught of congratulations text messages immediately, with Bruce's text consisting of 2 words, "adequately performed." High praise coming from the Batman. Izuku couldn't help but feel lighter than air. All Might and Batman sat in silence in the Batmobile, driving back from their meeting with Detective Tsukachi. All Might had preferred to take a cab or the subway, but Tsukachi insisted that he go with Batman for his own safety. "Looks like young Midoriya passed the licensure exam," said All Might, breaking the silence. "You must be proud." "He performed as I expected he would," said Batman simply. "You don't give a lot of praise, do you?" said All Might. "The results themselves are their own rewards," said Batman. "I'm still mad at you, you know," said All Might. "Bully for you," said Batman. "I'm serious, Bruce," said All Might, annoyed. "You should have told me about Shigaraki." "We've been over this, Toshinori," said Batman. "I'm not apologizing over what I did to keep you safe." "Keep me safe," said All Might. "Yes," said Batman. "Had you known, Shigaraki and All for One would have exploited your feelings for his lineage to Nana Shimura, and it would have gotten you killed. Have you ever considered the fallout from a situation like that?" "What are you talking about?" said All Might. "It'd be no different from where we're at right now." "Wrong," said Batman flatly. "All for One wouldn't have stopped at killing you. He wanted to see you broken, humiliated and utterly beaten before allowing you to die. He would have wanted the whole world to see. They are already struggling enough to recover after Kamino Ward, and that was a battle you won. If you had fallen in battle before that, or worse, been shown to have been broken before death, the world would have been thrown into utter panic, and every villain worth their salt would be lining up to join the League of Villains. This is exactly what All for One wanted." "There are other heroes," said All Might. "There's the Justice League." "The Justice League is stretched thin enough as it is," said Batman. "What do you mean?" "You've been out of the Justice League a long time, Toshinori," said Batman. "Did you really think that it ended with Brainiac, or that he was the only threat in the universe? Oh no, there's more, a lot more, and it has the Justice League, the Martians, the Green Lantern Corps, and every ally we have in the cosmos currently fighting to hold them back." "You can't be serious," said All Might. "I'm always serious," said Batman. And what's more, our worst fear since defeating Brainiac has been realized. Pieces of himself have been spread across time and space. All for One already merged with a piece, and there's no telling how many more of them are out there. And I don't have to explain to you what that means. He could come back, said All Might, horrified. He already has through All for One, albeit not completely, said Batman. Just imagine 10, 100, or even 1,000 of him. And that's just the beginning. You think that suit I wore was really meant for him. And even that wasn't strong enough, forcing me to overhaul the design completely. All the while, our forces struggle to continue the fight out there so the world can continue to feel safe. Truly, you have no idea what's really going on. What's lurking beyond our solar system waiting for the right window of opportunity to break through our defenses. One day soon, they will make their way here to Earth, and we're not ready. Ready for what, Bruce? Said All Might. What's out there? Nightmares, said Batman solemnly. Pure, unhindered nightmares. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 8. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.